The darkness smelled of wet stone and something sour. Not vinegar, not lemon, something organic. Chitinous. Jacob Kahn opened his eyes and saw everything at once. Not the way a human sees, not two focal points with blurred edges. He saw a panorama. A wide, seamless frame made up of 8 light sources. His brain was trying to piece the image together, but couldn't keep up. The image swam. It doubled. Then it settled into place. The ceiling, the wall, a crack in the stone, a thread. He was hanging from a thread. He'd spun it himself. From where? From his abdomen. He had an abdomen. Jay looked at his hands. He didn't have hands. He had legs, 8 of them, thin, covered with short hairs. The joints bent the wrong way. The wrong way for a human. For a spider, they bent perfectly. Jay froze. His body was the size of a grape, a large one, but still a grape. He pulled his front legs up to his cephalothorax and felt himself. Pedipalps, long, too long for Salticidae. Dark in color with a gray pattern, something closer to Spiracidae, but not quite. He couldn't identify the species. He'd been an entomologist for 10 years and couldn't identify his own species. It would have been funny if he hadn't been hanging from a spiderweb in complete darkness in a place that smelled of death. Something scurried by below, something heavy. 6 legs. Each leg struck the rock with a dry click. Mandibles. He saw the mandibles, as long as his body. The creature didn't notice him. It passed right by. The sound faded. Jay tucked all 8 legs in and pressed himself against the ceiling. His heart was pounding. No, not a heart. Spiders don't have hearts in the human sense. Hemolymph. It pulsed through him so fast that he could feel the vibration in every hair. Breathe. Spiders don't have lungs. They have book lungs, plate-like structures in the abdomen. Air passes between the plates and oxygenates the hemolymph. Jay knew this. He'd written about it on his blog. He'd painted watercolors of the book lungs of Argiope aurantia for a magazine article. Now he was breathing with them. Stay calm. Stay calm, Jay. You're a spider. You're small. You're in a dark place. Something with mandibles as long as your body just passed over you. But you're alive. You're breathing. You're thinking. Spiders don't think, but you're thinking. So you're not just a spider. He pulled himself up along the thread. His legs moved confidently. His body knew what to do, even if his head hadn't figured it out yet. He climbed into a crack in the ceiling, a narrow one, deep. Inside, it was dry, warm, safe. As safe as it could possibly be when you're a grape in a world of jaws. Jay sat down, if you could call it that. He folded his legs beneath him and tried to think. The last thing he remembered? The highway. Night. An overturned car on the shoulder. He stopped, ran toward it. The driver was inside, blood on the windshield. Jay crawled inside, pulled the man by the shoulder. Headlights behind him, the sound of brakes. A crash. Then nothing. Then the smell of chitin. Then 8 eyes. He was dead. He was definitely dead. And now he was a spider. In a dungeon. A real dungeon with real monsters, just like in those manhwa his students used to read during lectures instead of their notes. Only there, the heroes were reborn as dragons and wolves. But he had been reborn as a spider, the size of a grape, on some deep level where even the air smells of danger. Jay tapped the stone softly with his front leg. The sound was dry, crisp. He felt the vibration through the hairs on his legs. Trichobotres, sensitive hairs that detect air movement and surface vibrations. He had trichobatteries, and they were working. He could sense everything. The slightest vibrations of the stone, the movement of air from deep within the crack, and someone's distant rustling below. The world had grown louder, more detailed, more terrifying, but also more understandable. Jay began to examine the crack. It extended half a meter into the depths. The walls were smooth. The floor was dry. The ceiling was low. For a grape, it was a cave. He could hide here. He could wait it out here. But wait for what? He didn't know where he was. He didn't know how many of those jawed creatures were around. He didn't know if there was water here. He didn't know if there was any food here he could eat. He knew only one thing. He was a biologist. He'd spent his whole life studying arthropods. He knew how they lived, how they hunted, how they hid, how they built traps, how they communicate. He knew this better than anyone he knew. And now, he himself was one of them. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe that's exactly why he wasn't a wyvern or a wolf. Maybe the world, or God, or the system, or whatever was controlling this process, had given him the one body that, out of all the others who'd ended up here, only he would be able to use to its fullest. Or maybe it was just irony, and in a minute, that creature with the mandibles would eat him. Jay released a thin thread from his abdomen. It glistened in the dim light coming from somewhere below. Phosphorescence. Fungi or bacteria on the walls. Bioluminescence. He could see enough to find his way. The thread was strong. He tugged at it with his leg. It sprang back. It didn't break. Spider silk. Stronger than steel by mass. More elastic than Kevlar. He'd written about it. He knew the numbers. The tensile strength of up to 1.75 gigapascals. It could be stretched up to 30% without breaking. And he could produce it. Himself. From his own body. Jay released another strand. And another. Different ones. He could feel the difference. One was sticky. Another was dry and stiff. The third was thin and almost invisible. At least 3 types, maybe more. Real spiders produce up to 7 types of silk from different glands. If he has all 7, that changes everything. He began to weave. Not a web yet. Just a crosswise barrier across the entrance to the crevice. Dry, sturdy. A warning signal. If anyone touched it, he'd feel a vibration. It was his first engineering structure in this new world. A web barrier. Spun in the darkness by a tiny spider who, 3 minutes ago, had been an entomologist from Portland. Jay finished the barrier and crawled deeper into the crack. He sat down, folded his legs, and for the first time since waking up, he thought not about survival, but about something else. He thought about that driver in the overturned car. He never checked to see if the man was still breathing. That had been his last thought before death. And for some reason, it seemed important. More important than his mandibles. More important than the darkness. More important than 8 eyes and a body the size of a grape. He hadn't checked. And now he was here. Was there a connection? He didn't know, but the hairs on his legs were quivering. Not from the vibration, from something else. Something spiders aren't supposed to feel. It was quiet in the crevice. Outside, something far away was scraping against stone. Jay closed 4 of his 8 eyes. He left the other 4 open. To stare into the darkness. To wait. To listen. He didn't sleep that first night. He counted the pulses of his hemolymph and memorized the sounds. After 6 hours, he knew that 3 routes passed by his crevice. One was used by a creature with mandibles, one by something small and fast, and one by something heavy that drags its tail. He didn't see them. He heard them with his legs. His trichobothria worked like seismographs. By morning, if there is such a thing as morning here, Jay had drawn up his first map in his head. 3 routes, 3 types of creatures, 1 crack. 1 grape with a plan. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The second day began with hunger. Not human hunger, not the kind where you crave a burger and coffee. It was the body's hunger, cellular, as if every plate of his book-like lungs demanded fuel, as if his silk glands were idling and burning through reserves. Jay felt his hemolymph slowing down, his legs a little heavier. He knew what that signal meant. Spiders can go without food for weeks, but spiders in an active phase burn more energy, and he was in a very active phase. He was building, thinking, spinning. He was using up silk, and silk is protein. Protein is food. Food he didn't have. He had to hunt. Jay crawled out of the crack and hung from the ceiling. His 8 eyes took in the panorama. A corridor, wide, 4 meters. The walls glowed dimly with mushrooms. The floor was wet. There were tracks on the floor, scratches from claws, streaks of something dark, blood or hemolymph. Someone's. Not his. Not yet, anyway. He began moving along the ceiling. Small, gray, almost invisible against the stone. That was its main advantage. Size. Not strength, not speed. Size. No one notices a grape. No one fears a grape. A grape can go where no one else can. 20 minutes later, it found its first prey. A beetle, the size of its own body. 6 legs, thick shell, short antennae. It moved slowly. It was chewing on something on the wall. Mushrooms. A phytophagous or mycophagous insect, not a predator. Jay froze. His eyes automatically began to see differently, as if a lens had switched on in his head. He saw the beetle not merely as an object, but as a living organism. The joints between the head and the pronotum, thin, fragile. Respiratory openings on the sides of the abdomen. Stigmas, 9 pairs, open. Tracheal respiration, vulnerable to blockage. Probable diet, fungi and organic debris. No venom, no defensive glands, no offensive appendages. A pure prey. Something flashed before his eyes, translucent, like an entry in an invisible notebook. The outline of a beetle. Hotspots highlighted, neck joint, stigmas, soft tissue under the elytra. Jay blinked his 4 eyes. The entry remained. It was like a field journal. His field journal. Only not on paper, but in his head. The system. It existed. It didn't grant levels or experience points. It gave him what he did best. Observation, classification, analysis, a diagnostic gaze. It was working. Jay descended along the thread directly above the beetle, silent, not a single sound. The hairs on his legs detected the beetle's vibrations, rhythmic chewing. The creature sensed no threat. Jay chose a spot, the joint between the head and the pronotum, the thinnest spot. He leaped. A small spider landed on the beetle's back and plunged its chelicerae precisely into the joint. The beetle twitched. Its legs scraped against the wall, but Jay held on. 4 legs clung to the edge of the carapace. The chelicerae sank deeper. He could feel his venom. Yes, it had venom. Weak, but sufficient for a creature of its size. The venom spread through the beetle's tissues. Its nervous system shut down segment by segment. First the hind legs, then the middle ones, then the front ones. The beetle slid down the wall and fell to the floor. Jay sat on top of it. His first kill. His first murder. Not in battle, while hunting. He knew what to call it in biological terms. Predation. An active ambush strategy involving direct injection of a toxin. But that knowledge didn't take away what he was feeling. The beetle was still twitching its antennae, slowly, almost as if it were feeling the air for the last time. Jay watched. He thought back to his blog, 8 Eyes, 1 Heart. He'd written there that every arthropod is a tiny universe. Every beetle represents millions of years of evolution. Every creature deserves respect. And now he was eating one of them. He was eating a beetle. And the beetle tasted good. Not in a human sense, in a spider's sense. The beetle's hemolymph was slightly sweet and thick. It filled his body with energy. His silk glands stopped ache. His legs felt light again. He ate and felt his body working, processing, building. But it was just a beetle, just food. No mutation, no growth, just fuel. To grow, he needed something more dangerous. Jay finished eating the beetle and hid the remains of its shell in a crack. A field researcher's habit: preserve the specimen, record the data. He opened his field journal in his mind and made a note. Beetle, level unknown. Mycophage, tracheal respiration. 9 pairs of stigmas. The toxin is effective. Paralysis lasts about 2 minutes. The taste is slightly sweet. No mutations. Sketch. Outline of the beetle with markings. The entry was saved. Clear. He could return to it at any moment. This changed the rules. He could accumulate knowledge, systematize, find connections. Every other monster in this dungeon just ate and grew blindly. Jay could eat and understand exactly what he was eating. He spent the rest of the day exploring. He moved along the ceiling, small, gray, invisible. He mapped it out. The corridor branched into 3 passages. The left one led downward. The middle one went straight ahead. The right one went slightly upward. In the left passage, the air was warmer and more humid. More mushrooms on the walls. More small creatures. Beetles, millipedes. Something like a woodlouse, but with spines on its back. The middle passage was empty. Too empty. Smooth walls. No mushrooms, no tracks. That was alarming. When there's an empty zone in an ecosystem, it means one thing. Someone lives there that everyone else avoids. The right passage was more interesting. Jay found water there. A thin trickle seeped from a crack in the wall and flowed into a shallow puddle. There were tracks around the puddle, lots of tracks, different ones. It was a watering hole, a place where prey comes to you. Jay noted it in his journal. Not a trap yet, just an observation point for now. He returned to his crack before the creature with the mandibles passed through the corridor. That very one. He recognized it by the sound. 6 legs, dry clicks. It passed through the middle corridor, the empty one. Now he knew who lived there. On the 3rd day, everything changed. He explored the left passage and went too far. He got carried away. He found a colony of mushrooms with unusual bioluminescence and stopped to sketch them. His field journal opened. He drew, just like in the old days, like on that field trip in Oregon, when he could sit for an hour sketching the pattern on a butterfly's wing. He didn't hear it. He didn't sense it in time. The centipede emerged from the side passage like a train from a tunnel, a meter long. Long. Segmented. Each segment armored. Its legs moved in waves. Its mandibles were open. It had spotted him, not with its eyes, by vibration. Jay ran. All 8 legs clung to the ceiling and carried him toward the crack, but the centipede was faster. It was climbing the wall. Its legs dug into the stone. It was 20 times his size. His web couldn't hold it. He tried. He shot a sticky thread across the passage. The centipede passed through it as if through rain. It tore the web with its weight. It didn't even notice. Jay turned into a side crevice, a narrow one. The centipede wouldn't fit through, but it didn't stop. It began to pick at the entrance with its mandibles. The stone crumbled. It was widening the passage. He had maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. Then it would reach him. Panic. Real panic. Animal panic. His hemolymph pulsed wildly. All 8 eyes were wide open. His body wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run. The crack ended in a dead end. And then Jay stopped. He closed 4 eyes and thought like a biologist. A centipede, Calopida, a predator, an active hunter, armored tergites on every segment. But between the segments are sternites, soft, thin, vulnerable. Tracheal respiration, stigmas on the sides of the body, open, unprotected. Humidity. Centipedes do not tolerate sudden changes in humidity well. Their tracheae lack a closing mechanism. If their stigmas are flooded with water, they suffocate. Water. A water source in the right passage, far away, but a thread. His thread holds the water. The sticky, trapping thread is hygroscopic. It absorbs and holds, like a sponge. Jay began to weave, quickly, feverishly, but precisely. Not a trapping net, that's useless. He was weaving a 3-layer structure. The first layer, a dry support thread, strong, stiff. The framework, you could walk on it. The second layer, a sponge, a wet thread soaked in water he'd collected from the condensation on the walls of the crevice. The third layer, a sticky, trapping thread at the bottom on the floor. The centipede was scraping against the rock. It was close. Jay was working. His legs moved with a precision he didn't know he possessed. His body knew. His body was skilled. He was merely guiding it. The structure spanned the entire passageway, from wall to wall, from ceiling to floor, 3 layers. Architecture, engineering, not instinct, calculation. The centipede broke through. It lunged forward. Its front legs got stuck in the 3rd layer. It yanked. The sticky thread held. Not forever, maybe just for a few seconds. But that was enough. The centipede's weight crushed the middle layer. The sponge burst. Water gushed over its body. It seeped into the stigmas, into all the stigmas at once. The centipede thrashed. Its movements became chaotic, jerky. It was suffocating. Jay stood on the top layer, on a dry supporting thread, above it. He looked down with 8 eyes. The creature was 20 times his size, and it was dying from the water and the web. When it slowed down enough, Jay climbed down, carefully, along the support thread. He stood on its back. He found the junction between the 3rd and 4th segments, the sternite, a soft membrane. Beneath it, a nerve node. He knew this. He'd read about it in the 2014 article by Manelli and Bonicelli. The nervous system of chilopods. Paired ganglia in each segment. A central nerve trunk. If severed between the 3rd and 4th segments, the rear half of the body shuts down completely. Jay plunged his chelicerae in, deep, precise. The venom flowed into the nerve node. The centipede twitched one last time and went still. Silence. Jay stood over the dead creature, breathing heavily with his book-like lungs. He had just killed a 1-meter-long centipede. A spider the size of a grape had killed a 1-meter-long centipede. Not by strength, by knowledge. Now it was time to eat, and this was the most important moment. Any other monster would have devoured it whole, in one gulp, piece by piece, and would have ended up with a random set of mutations. Armor, venom, extra legs, anything, random junk. But Jay wasn't just any other monster. He was an entomologist. He knew what this creature had and what he wanted. Not venom. A centipede's venom is a necrototoxin. It destroys tissue. Crude, inaccurate. Not armor. Armor is weight. Weight means slowness. He couldn't afford to be slow. A nerve node. That's what he needed. The accelerated nerve conduction of chelicerates. Their nervous system works faster than that of most arthropods. That's exactly why they're such fast hunters. Jay leaned over the sternite. Carefully, he parted the tissues with his chelicerae. He found the ganglion, small, whitish, dense. He began to eat, slowly, deliberately. He thought, I need speed, nerve conduction, reaction, throughout my entire body, like a jumping spider's. Fast, precise. He ate and thought, and something inside him responded. Warmth, not heat, not pain. Warmth. As if his body understood what he wanted, as if the system had read his intention and steered the mutation in the right direction. He ate the rest of the millipede simply as food, meat, fuel, without intention, without focus, just to replenish his reserves. He ate for a long time, 2 hours. The creature was enormous by his standards. When he finished, he felt his body begin to change. Barely noticeable at first, a slight tingling in his legs, a slightly sharper image in his eyes, a slightly faster reaction to sounds. The mutation was beginning. Slowly, just as it should be. Jay returned to the crevice. He made a note in his journal. A cave millipede, presumably a Calopoda, 1 meter long. Armored tergites. Tracheal respiration without a closing apparatus. Vulnerable to flooding of the stigmas. Nervous system. Paired ganglia. The mutation targeted the nerve node of the third segment. The goal? Accelerated conduction. A diagram. A 3-layered trap and cross-section. A sponge. A sticky layer. A support. Arrows indicating water distribution. He closed his journal and curled up in the crevice. The tingling in his legs grew stronger. The mutation was underway. He needed time and safety. He stretched a new signal thread across the entrance. He lay down. He closed all 8 eyes. And for the first time in 3 days, he fell asleep. The mutation came on the 4th day, not as a gift, as a disease. Jay woke up to the sensation that his body was burning from the inside, not with fire, with electricity. Every nerve fiber in his body was pulsing, rearranging itself. Old connections were snapping, new ones were sprouting. He could feel it, every new fiber, every new synapse. The pain was both pinpoint precise and endless at the same time. He couldn't move. His legs wouldn't respond. His chelicerae wouldn't clamp shut. His eyes were blurry. His book lungs were working erratically. Inhale, pause. Inhale, pause. As if his body had forgotten how to breathe and was learning all over again. Molting. He knew what it was. He'd seen it thousands of times on video and in person. A spider sheds its old exoskeleton. It emerges soft, wet, defenseless. For several hours, it cannot move until the new shell hardens. In nature, this is the most vulnerable moment. More than half of all spiders die during molting. Eaten, dried out. They fall. Jay lay in a crevice, molting. His exoskeleton was cracking along his back. A thin fissure ran from his cephalothorax to his abdomen. He could feel the old shell peeling away from his body. He could feel the new skin beneath it, wet, tender, and unbearably sensitive, touching the air for the first time. It went on for hours. He didn't count. He couldn't. His mind was working in fits and starts. His consciousness drifted. Sometimes he saw the crack. Sometimes he saw his lab in Portland, the table, the microscope, watercolors in a tin box, the face of the colleague who brought him coffee when he worked late. Her name. Sarah. No, not now. Right now, he had to survive. The sensor wire at the entrance twitched. Jay felt it even through the fog of pain. New nerve fibers were working, even if they were underdeveloped, even if they were raw. They were faster than the old ones. A vibration, faint, frequent. Legs, tiny, many. Not a centipede, something small, lots of small things. Jay opened his two eyes, blurry, but he could see. Shadows were moving at the entrance to the crack. Tiny spiders, the size of his old body. Grapes. 10 of them, 15, more. They were following the scent. He realized which one. His shed skin, his discarded shell. Protein, chitin. For these little scavengers, it was food. They'd come to eat his old skin. And if they found him, soft, wet, unable to move, they'd eat him too. Spiders aren't sentimental. Scavengers even less so. Jay couldn't run. He couldn't fight. His chelicerae weren't working. His legs hung like wet ropes. His new exoskeleton hadn't hardened yet. He was flesh wrapped in wet paper. But he could think. And he could spin. One gland was working, not all of them, just one, the most primitive one. A thin, dry thread. Weak, but enough. Jay squeezed the thread out of his abdomen, slowly, through the pain. He stretched it toward the wall of the crack, secured it, stretched a second one, a third. Not a web, not a trap, an alarm system. Each thread was stretched at a different height. Each led back to his body. If anyone touched any of them, he would feel it. Not with his legs, with his new nerves, which were already working, even if only at half strength. Scavenger spiders had reached the discarded exoskeleton. He could hear them tearing it apart with their chelicerae. The crunch of chitin, the smacking sounds. They were eating. They were occupied. For now. Jay lay there and waited. Every minute felt like an eternity. His body was drying out, slowly. Too slowly. The new exoskeleton was hardening from the outside in. First his back, then his sides, then his claws. Last of all, his legs. Another hour. Maybe 2. After an hour, the web-like exoskeleton no longer gave way to the touch. After 2, Jay was able to bend his front pair of claws. After 3 hours, he stood up, unsteadily, hesitantly. But he stood. The scavengers had finished eating his shell and began to scatter. 3 lingered at the entrance, sniffing, wiggling their pedipalps, sensing him. Alive. Soft. Tasty. Jay looked at them, with 8 eyes. And for the first time, he tried something he'd never done before. He raised his front legs, slowly, spread them apart, froze. It was a pose, not accidental, deliberate, a pose of dominance. He'd seen it hundreds of times during field observations. A large spider raises its front legs to show its size. It's a threat, a warning. I'm here. I'm bigger than you think. Go away. The 3 scavengers froze. Their pedipalps twitched. The one in front backed away. The second followed. The third hesitated for a second. Then it left too. Jay remained in his dominant stance for another minute after they'd disappeared. Then he lowered his legs and sat down. He was shaking. Not from fear, from relief. He'd survived. His first molt was behind him, and it had worked. He could feel the difference, his nerve conduction. Before, his reactions had been ordinary, spider-like, good by human standards, mediocre by dungeon standards. Now he sensed every sound before he was even aware of it, every vibration, every movement of the air. His body reacted faster than his thoughts. His legs moved on their own, dodging, turning, grabbing, as if each leg had its own little brain that didn't wait for a command from above but acted on its own. That's how it was. In a sense. The ganglia of a centipede, paired nerve nodes, a distributed nervous system. He didn't just speed up. He began to think with his whole body. Jay spent the rest of the day testing things out. Jumps, turns, dodges. He threw pebbles in front of him and caught them in midair. He jumped from the ceiling to the wall and back. He ran along a string stretched across the hallway and changed direction at full speed. His body was the same size, same weight, but it moved differently, like a sports car after a new engine. The body was old. The engine was new. And there was something else. He'd gotten a little bigger, not by much, but molting had added some size. He was no longer the size of a grape, more like a large cherry. Growth. Slow, but growth. On the 5th day, he began to build a real nest. Not just a crack with a thread stretched across it, a real shelter, an engineered structure. He chose a spot. A fork in the ceiling in the right passageway, above the watering hole, a strategic position. Water nearby, prey comes right to him, a view in 3 directions. He started with the framework, a dry supporting thread, thick, sturdy. He wove it like the trusses of a bridge, triangles, the most stable shape. Then the walls, not solid, mesh, with openings small enough that nothing larger than himself could squeeze through, but large enough to let air pass through. Ventilation, critical for a book's lungs. Then the floor, double layered. The bottom layer was sticky, a trap. If anyone broke through, they'd get stuck. The top layer was dry. Jay walked on it himself. Then the signaling system. Strands radiated out from the nest in all directions. 20 strands, each in its own direction. Each was tensioned with a different force. Each vibrated at its own frequency. He could lie in the center of the nest and sense everything happening within a 10-meter radius, like a spider at the center of a web. Because he was a spider at the center of a web. But his web wasn't a trap. It was a radar. It took 2 days to build. He worked methodically, like an engineer, like a scientist setting up an experiment. Every knot was checked. Every thread was tensioned to the right strength. Every connection was secure. On the 7th day, the nest was ready. Jay lay at its center and listened to the world through his threads. The watering hole below. Tiny beetles coming and going. Something large passed through the middle corridor. A creature with mandibles. He already knew its schedule. It passed by twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. If there is such a thing as morning and evening here. Somewhere far away in the left passage, a colony of tiny creatures was rustling. Tiny and numerous. He wrote in his journal. Day 7. Nest built. Coordinates. The fork in the right passage. Signaling system. 20 threads, 10-meter radius. 3 layers of protection. Diagram. Cross-section of the nest. Top view. Markings indicating thread directions. Caption. Home. Version 1.0. He would have smiled if spiders could smile. Instead, he tapped a support thread with his front leg, rhythmically, like on a table. A habit from a past life. Tapping on the table when he's pleased. On the 9th day, he met for the first time those who would change everything. Signal thread number 7 twitched. Slightly. Frequently. Many legs. Tiny ones. Jay crept to the edge of the nest and looked down. Spiders. 13 of them. Small. Pale. Almost transparent. Blind. They had no eyes. At all. Smooth cephalothoraxes, without a single trace of ocular tubercles. Cave adaptation. Troglobites. They moved as a group, not chaotically, organized. The front ones felt their way. The middle ones carried something in their chelicerae. Tiny pieces. Food. The rear ones brought up the rear. Social behavior. In spiders. Jay froze. Social spiders had existed on Earth. Stegodyphus, Anolosimus. They built shared webs, shared their prey, raised their offspring together. Rare species. Amazing. He'd written about them on his blog, and now they were right beneath him. A colony of blind social spiders in the underground. His heart, his pulsing hemolymph, it quickened, not from fear, from delight. Pure scientific delight. Just like that time when he found a new population of Bagheera kiplingi in Mexico and nearly fell out of a tree with joy. Jay began to observe, quietly, from above, without interfering. The colony came to the watering hole, drank its fill, left chemical markings on the rock, left, returned the next day, and the next. After 3 days, he knew their route, their schedule, their signals. They communicated through vibrations, the tapping of their paws on the rock, specific rhythms. Short, short, long meant the path was clear. Long, long, short meant danger. 3 short ones meant food had been found. He wrote it all down. He drew pictures. He compiled a dictionary of their language. On the 12th day, he made up his mind. He climbed down from the nest. He sat on a rock next to their path. And when the colony approached, he tapped the rock with his leg. Short, short, long. The path is clear. The colony stopped. The front spiders froze. Their pedipalps twitched. They were listening. Jay repeated it. Short, short, long. The front spider answered. Short, short, long. And then it added something Jay hadn't heard before. 2 short ones and a pause. Jay didn't know what it meant, but he replied the same way. 2 short ones and a pause. The lead spider moved forward, slowly, feeling its way through the air. It approached Jay. It touched his leg with its own, gently, like a handshake. Then it moved away. The colony moved on, past him, not around him, past him, as if he were one of their own. Jay sat on a rock and watched them go. All 8 eyes, every single one. And for the first time in 12 days in this world, he didn't feel alone. The second week transformed Jay from a refugee into a resident. He woke up in the nest, checked the signal threads, went down to hunt, ate, took notes, drew. He'd return, a routine. Strange, spider-like, but a routine nonetheless. And within this routine, he began to understand the world around him. The floor where he lived was an ecosystem, a closed one, self-sufficient. The mushrooms on the walls were producers, the foundation of the food chain. Mycophagous beetles ate the mushrooms. Small predators ate the beetles. Large predators ate the small ones. The millipede was at the top of this chain. It was. Now, he was at the top. For now, only in this area. For now, only within the radius of his signal threads, but at the top. His field journal was filling up. A new entry every day, a new species, a new sketch. A mycophagous beetle, 3 subspecies. They differ in the shape of their antennae and the number of stigmas. Subspecies A is larger. It tastes better. Subspecies B is faster. Subspecies C is poisonous. Only slightly, but poisonous. Don't eat it. A parasitic mite. It lives on beetles, about the size of a poppy seed. It attaches itself to the joints of the legs. It sucks out hemolymph, useless as food, but interesting as an indicator. If the beetle is clean, it means it's healthy and active. If it's covered in mites, it means it's weakened. Easy prey. A millipede. Another one. Not a meter long. Half a meter long. Young. He killed it with the same trap, but easier, faster. The second time is always easier. He ate the muscle fibers, on purpose. Contractile force, not mass, not volume. The force of the fiber per unit cross-section. The body responded. The chelicerae grew stronger, noticeably so. He could bite through a beetle's shell in a single motion. Before, he'd had to look for cracks. There was no molting. Minor mutations didn't require a complete overhaul. They were absorbed gradually, like a vitamin, not like surgery. That was important. This meant he could eat purposefully every day, accumulate micro-improvements. And molting was needed only for major restructuring. He wrote this down, underlined it, an important observation. A colony of blind spiders had become his neighbors. He didn't tame them, didn't feed them, didn't command them. He simply stayed nearby. He tapped on the rock as they passed by. Short, short, long. The path is clear. They responded. Sometimes they left bits of food on his rock, small, symbolic. He didn't know what that meant in their culture. A gift, a tribute, an invitation. He accepted it. He ate it. In return, he left them pieces of a beetle. An exchange. Primitive, but an exchange. On the 16th day, they led him to their nest. He hadn't expected this. He was simply following the colony along the ceiling, at a distance, observing. They turned into a narrow passage he hadn't noticed before. Beyond it lay a chamber. Not large, about 3 meters in diameter, but entirely covered in cobwebs. Their cobwebs. Coarse, dense, lacking engineering precision, but functional. In the center sat those who hadn't gone to the watering hole. The young ones. Tiny little ones. And several large females with swollen abdomens. Queens. They were guarding their egg clusters, white cocoons the size of a pea. The colony was larger than he'd thought. Not 30 individuals, about 100, maybe more. Workers, scouts, guards, queens, young. A fully fledged social colony. Jay sat on the ceiling of the chamber and looked down. His field journal opened on its own. He was drawing. A diagram of the nest, the layout of the chambers, the workers' routes, the guards' positions. It was beautiful, in a purely scientific sense. Social behavior in spiders, underground, under conditions of constant threat. They had developed a collective survival strategy, division of roles, communication, culture. Primitive, perhaps, but culture nonetheless. He spent half a day in their nest, listening. He observed. He learned new signals. Long pause, short, short, meant an intruder was nearby. 3 long ones in a row meant great danger, everyone hide. A single long vibrating signal meant everything was calm, go to sleep. By evening, he knew their language better than he knew Spanish after 2 years of college courses. On the way back to his nest, Jay thought about scale for the first time. He lived in a single section on a single floor. All around were other sections, other corridors, other chambers, other ecosystems. And there were 200 floors, at least, maybe more. Each floor was a separate biome, with its own fauna, its own predators, its own rules. He was a grain of sand in the ocean, but a grain of sand that could write. On the 18th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. He found a note in his journal that wasn't his. He leafed through his entries. He checked the data on the colony's vibrational signals. He turned the page and saw an entry he hadn't made. The handwriting looked like his, very similar, but not his. The slant of the letters was slightly different. The way the arrows were drawn was slightly different. The entry was in English, short, 3 lines. The first described a creature on the 200th floor, something large, something was ancient, something that didn't move but was still alive. The second line described a sound, low, rhythmic, like breathing. The third line broke off in the middle of a word, as if the writer hadn't had time to finish. or couldn't. Jay reread it 3 times. His hemolymph ran cold. Someone before him had kept this journal. Someone before him had been a spider in this dungeon. Someone before him had written in English and drawn like an entomologist. And that someone had stopped mid-sentence on the topic of the 200th floor. Jay was on the 200th floor, or thereabouts. He didn't know for sure. But the air here was ancient, heavy, like in the deepest mine, like at the bottom of the ocean. Something was breathing here, something big. He heard it sometimes, at night, a distant, rhythmic rumble. He thought it was tectonics, the movement of rock, underground rivers. Now he wasn't sure. He closed the journal, sat in silence, then opened it again and wrote his own entry beneath someone else's. He found someone else's notes in his field journal. The handwriting isn't mine, but it's similar. The language is English. The author describes something on the 200th floor. The entry breaks off. Hypothesis. I'm not the first one to end up here. Someone was here before me, in the same body or a similar one, with the same journal or a similar one. He didn't finish his work. Question. Why? He drew a question mark, a big one, across the whole page. Then he turned the page and started a new entry. Day 18. Status. Size, large cherry. Mutations, accelerated nerve conduction plus enhanced chelicerae. Nest is stable. Contact established with the colony of blind spiders. Vibration signal vocabulary, 12 phrases. Controlled territory, 15-meter radius. Knowledge of fauna, 6 species described. Threat, a creature with mandibles in the central corridor. Schedule known, route predictable, avoidable. New threat, unknown. The 200th floor. Something is breathing. On the 20th day, Jay made a decision. He needed to grow, not in size, in understanding. He knew his section of the floor, 3 corridors, the watering hole, the colony, a dozen species. That wasn't enough. To truly survive, he needed a map, a big one, a detailed one, with food chains, migrations, dangerous zones, safe zones, resources. He needed to go out into the field, like in the old days, a backpack, a notebook, binoculars. Only now, his backpack was his belly, filled with a supply of silk. His notebook was the field journal in his head, and his binoculars were 8 eyes with new neural conductivity. He left a signal for the colony, long pause long. I'm leaving. I'll be back. He didn't know if they had such a signal. He made it up. But they answered. Short, short, long. The way is clear. Maybe they understood. Maybe not. He moved down the left corridor, to where he hadn't been, to where the air was warmer and heavier, to where something was breathing. He walked along the ceiling. Small, gray, fast, invisible. A spider on a reconnaissance mission. An entomologist on a field trip. The first 100 meters were familiar. Mushrooms on the walls, beetles, small predators. Then the landscape changed. The mushrooms grew larger, darker. Their glow was blue, not green. Different species, a different ecosystem. The fauna had changed too. The beetles were gone. Woodlice appeared, large ones, with spines. The very ones he'd seen before but hadn't studied. Jay stopped. His diagnostic gaze kicked in. A woodlouse, not an ordinary one, a mutated one. The spines on the tergites weren't for defense. They were hollow, with holes at the ends, glands inside, secreting something, poison or acid or pheromones. He couldn't determine exactly without analysis. He sketched, quickly, schematically, an outline, markings, arrows, questions. He kept going. After 500 meters, the corridor widened into a hall. The ceiling rose 10 meters. The walls spread apart. and Jay saw what made him stop. A skeleton lay on the floor of the hall. Not an insect's, not an arthropod. A human. Bones. Old, yellowed, cracked. Ribs, spine, skull. Next to the bones lay some gear, a rusty sword, remnants of leather armor, a bag falling apart, small objects spilled out of it, coins, vials, something shiny. An adventurer, someone from the surface. He went down too deep, didn't make it back. Jay went down to the skeleton. He examined it. The bones were damaged, claw marks, bite marks, acid burns. He'd been killed. Not by a single thing, several creatures. Perhaps they'd fought over him after he died. Among the belongings, Jay found a map, a fragment, darkened by moisture, but still legible. The levels were marked on it. Numbers: 195, 196, 197, 198. Arrows, passages, markings in a language Jay didn't know. Not English, something local. But the numbers were clear. The 200th floor. He was on the 200th floor, or nearby. This adventurer had come here on purpose. He was looking for something. He didn't find it, or he found it, and that's what killed him. Jay took the scrap of the map. He memorized the layout. He wrote it down in his journal. Day 20. Expedition. Found the adventurer's remains. Floor 198 or 200, approximately. The map is incomplete. The fauna has changed. A new biome. Blue mushrooms. Spiny woodlice with hollow spines. Presumably poisonous or acidic. The skeleton has been gnawed on by multiple predators. The place is dangerous. Well, he'll have to come back better prepared. He turned back. That's enough for one day. He knew the limits of his strength. He knew when to stop. That's what set a scientist apart from an adventurer. A scientist returns so he can come back again. An adventurer keeps going until he collapses. Jay returned to the nest. He checked the threads. Everything was quiet. The colony had come by as scheduled. It had left a piece of a beetle on his rock. He ate it. He lay down. He closed his eyes. 4 out of 8. The rest were staring into the darkness. He thought about the skeleton, about the map, about the stranger's note in the diary, about what was breathing down below, and about the fact that he had a plan. Not an escape plan, not a battle plan, a plan of exploration. He was a scientist. He would study this world, meter by meter, species by species, level by level. And maybe, when he reached the bottom, he'd understand why he'd been thrown in here. For now, he was a little spider with a big diary. And that was enough, for now. By the end of the first month, Jay had grown to the size of a palm. Not a child's, an adult man's palm, spread open with splayed fingers. It was the size at which they stopped ignoring him. Beetles scattered, woodlice hid. Even the mandible-wielding creature from the middle corridor changed its route. It didn't go around him, but it slowed down, sniffed, assessed, until it decided it wasn't worth messing with him. For now. The growth was the result of methodical work, hunting every day, meaningful food every day, muscle fibers for strength, chitin plates for shell durability, sensory cells for precision of perception. Minor mutations, no molting, gradual. Like vitamins, the body absorbed them. It was restructuring itself, growing. The journal was filling up. 27 species described, food webs of 3 biomes, a map of the area extending half a kilometer in every direction from the nest, migration routes of 7 predator species, schedules, territories, habits. He knew his section of the underground better than any knew the first 20 floors. The colony of blind spiders was growing too. Not in size, in number. A new generation had hatched from their cocoons, tiny, transparent spiderlings. Hundreds of them. They scurried through the chambers, learning to tap, learning to hunt, learning to fear. Jay watched them for hours. He recorded their stages of development. He drew pictures. His relationship with the colony had changed. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't a neighbor. He was something else. The word he chose in his journal was mutualist, a mutually beneficial symbiont. He brought them food they couldn't obtain on their own, pieces of predators, large and nutritious. They gave him information. Their scouts covered a territory 10 times larger than he could cover alone. When they found something new or dangerous, they returned and tapped. And he understood. He devised new signals for them and for himself. Long, short meant large prey need help. Short pause, short meant new species detected, show me. They adopted his signals, incorporated them into their language. It was incredible. It was the first evidence that the underground system wasn't just giving him tools. It was giving him the ability to change the environment around him, not by force, by communication. On the 25th day, Jay saw for the first time the consequences of what was breathing down below. He was walking along the ceiling toward the far end of the left corridor, beyond the chamber with the skeleton, past the blue mushrooms, past the territory of the spiny woodlice, to where the corridor began to descend, gradually, degree by degree. The air grew thicker, warmer. The mushrooms vanished. The glow faded. Total darkness. But his eyes adjusted. 8 eyes, with enhanced nerves, gathered every photon. He could see in the dark. Not perfectly, but he could see. The walls here were different. Not stone, not rock. Something organic, smooth, warm. He touched the wall with a paw and pulled it away. The wall pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, like a heart. Like a huge heart, the size of a floor. He looked at the wall and understood. It wasn't a wall. It was tissue, living tissue. The dungeon at this depth wasn't a dungeon. It was a body. Someone's body. He turned and left, quickly. He didn't run, he walked. Controlled, but quickly. He wasn't ready. Not now, not at this scale, not with this set of mutations. He wrote in his journal. Day 25. Deep exploration. The boundary between geological and biological structures has been detected. The walls are pulsating. Presumably living tissue. Hypothesis. Zerat Door is not an underground chamber. Zerat Door is an organism. The lower levels are its body. Diagram. Schematic cross-section. The upper levels are stone. The lower levels are organic. Transition zone. Downward arrow. Question mark. Caption. Do not go below without preparation. He returned to his routine, but the routine had changed. Now it had a purpose. Not just to survive, to understand. He began to systematize everything he knew, the ecology of the level, food chains, species, behavior, resources, dangers. He laid it all out in his journal like a puzzle. Every piece in its place, every connection marked. And there were gaps in this puzzle. Blank spots, things he didn't understand. Why the mushrooms glowed exactly that way. Why certain species didn't venture into certain zones. Why the air changed on a schedule, as if someone were controlling the ventilation. Why water flowed upward in one spot. A small trickle, thin, but upward, against gravity. He stood in front of that stream for 10 minutes and watched. The water flowed upward, up the wall, in a thin film. It rose a meter and disappeared into a crack. The capillary effect. Perhaps, if the wall is porous, if the surface tension is sufficient. But a 1-meter vertical rise would require very fine capillaries, thinner than a hair. The wall didn't look that porous. He took a water sample with his paw, tasted it. The water tasted slightly sweet, with a metallic aftertaste. Not water. Not quite water. Something else. He made a note. Not water. Presumably a fluid of biological origin. The organism's transport system, an analog of blood or lymph, moving upward, likely due to the peristalsis of the wall's tissues. The dungeon was pumping the fluid, just as a body pumps blood. It all added up. Everything pointed to one thing. Zerat Dor was alive. Not metaphorically, literally. On the 28th day, something happened that Jay hadn't planned on. He was sitting in the nest, rereading the diary, looking for connections, turning the pages. And he found a new, unfamiliar entry, one that hadn't been there yesterday. Short, 3 words in English. Not on the page, between the pages, as if written in the margins. As if it had emerged from beneath the text. 3 words. He read them, and froze. The words were simple, mundane, like a note on the fridge, but in the context of this place, they sounded like thunder. The entry said that the author knew about him. Not in the past, right now. Someone had seen his entries. Someone had replied. A second person was using this diary, right now. Or the diary itself was transmitting information between its owners, through time, through space. Jay closed the diary, opened it. The entries were still there. His old ones, old entries by others, a new entry by someone else. It was all real. Not a hallucination, not a glitch, not a malfunction of a starving brain. Someone else, another stranger, another spider, another entomologist. Maybe not an entomologist, maybe just a person. But someone, alive or dead, connected to him through the diary. Jay wrote a reply, short, cautious. He introduced himself, indicated his location, the 200th floor. Time spent here, 28 days. Species, spider. Size, the size of a palm. He asked, "Who are you?" He closed the diary. There was no reply. He waited an hour. 2. 3. There was no reply. Maybe the transmission wasn't instantaneous. Maybe it took time. Maybe the other person couldn't reply. Maybe the other person had been dead for a long time and his entries were seeping through like an echo. He didn't know. But he knew he wasn't alone, in a sense. On the 30th day, Jay began to molt for the second time. He could feel it coming a day ahead of time, an itch beneath his shell, heaviness in his legs, blurriness in his eyes. His body had accumulated enough changes to undergo a restructuring. Minor mutations had filled the limit. Now, a major molt was needed to integrate everything at once. He prepared himself. Not like the first time, when the molt caught him off guard. He stretched a triple signal net around the nest. He stocked the nest with food, 3 beetles, a piece of woodlouse, a 3-day supply. He left a signal for the colony. 3 long beeps in a row. Great danger. Not for them, for him. They understood it in their own way. They posted guards around his nest, tiny blind spiders, 12 of them. They sat in a circle, tapping their legs, quietly, rhythmically. All is calm. All is calm. Everything was calm. Jay lay in the center of the nest and felt his exoskeleton cracking. Pain again. Helplessness again. Wet, tender skin exposed to the air again. But this time he knew what to expect. He knew it would hurt. He knew it would take a long time. He knew he would survive. The molting lasted 2 days, shorter than the first time. His body already knew the process, muscle memory, if spiders have muscle memory. When he stood on his new legs, the world looked different. Not because the world had changed, because he had changed. He had grown in size, noticeably. He was now about the size of a large mouse, closer to a rat. His exoskeleton had become stronger, darker, with a gray-brown pattern that blended almost perfectly with the rock. Camouflage. Unintentional. Or perhaps intentional. He didn't remember if he'd thought about camouflage while eating. Maybe he had, subconsciously. His chelicerae had grown longer, sharper. His venom glands had enlarged. The venom had become stronger. He could feel it. Toxic. Concentrated. Not a necrotoxin, a neurotoxin, a fast-acting paralytic. Exactly what he'd wanted when he ate the centipede's nerve node. The system had remembered his intention and brought it to fruition through molting. But the main change was in the silk. The glands had reorganized. He could now spin 5 types of thread, previously 3, now 5. Dry support thread, sticky catching thread, thin signal thread, and 2 new ones. The 4th was elastic. It stretched to 3 times its length and returned to its original length, a shock absorber. The 5th was stiff, almost hard. It solidified in the air like glue. Structural, for frames, for structures, for tools. Jay sat in his upgraded body, testing the new threads. He pulled them, tore them, wove them, tied knots. Each type for its own purpose, each with unique properties. He recorded everything in his journal, in detail, with drawings, with specifications, with ideas for applications. Shock-absorbing thread, delayed action traps, fall arresters, elastic bandages, structural thread, frames, tools, maybe weapons, maybe armor. Not for himself. He already had armor. For others. That thought stopped him. For others. For whom? He was a spider, in the dungeon, alone, with a colony of blind spiders that didn't need armor. For whom could he possibly make things? He pushed the thought aside. Too soon. Way too soon. First, survive. First, grow. First, understand. Then, think about others. On the point, he went on his first serious hunt in his new body. The target was specific. The creature with mandibles from the middle corridor. He'd been watching it for a month. He knew its schedule. He knew its route. He knew its speed. He didn't know its species. He didn't know its anatomy. He didn't know its weaknesses. It was time to find out. He set up an ambush in the middle corridor. Not a trap, but an observation post. He hid in a ceiling niche, stretched out the signal threads, and waited. It arrived right on schedule. Jay saw it in its entirety for the first time. Not a shadow, not a sound, but a creature. 6 legs, not an insect. 6 legs, that's an insect. But the body structure was wrong. A head without antennae. Compound eyes, but arranged atypically, vertically, like slits. Massive mandibles, curved inward, serrated. The body was long, segmented, but the segments were uneven. The front ones were larger than the rear ones. The tail ended in something resembling a stinger, but not a stinger. Something else. My diagnostic instincts kicked in. Hotspots. The joints between the head and the first segment, weak. The base of the mandibles. The muscles are unevenly taut. The left mandible is slightly weaker than the right. Injury. An old one. Healed unevenly. Breathing. Not tracheal, not textbook lungs, something else entirely. openings on the back of the first segment. Large, opening and closing rhythmically. Active ventilation. This creature didn't breathe like an insect or a spider. It breathed like something he didn't know. A mutant. Not an earthly counterpart, an underground mutant, the product of millions of years of evolution in a closed ecosystem. Or the product of hundreds of years of devouring other mutants. Jay was taking notes, quickly, eagerly. It was new, completely new. A species not found in any field guide, a species that didn't exist on Earth. His hands, his paws, they trembled with excitement. The creature walked past. It didn't notice him. He was small, camouflaged, silent. She disappeared into the depths of the middle corridor, where it was empty. Now he knew why it was empty. It was her territory, her home. All living things gave it a wide berth because she killed everything that ventured in. Jay returned to his nest. He opened his journal to a blank page, and for the first time in a month, he drew a full-fledged portrait, just like in the old days, just like he used to draw for his blog, in detail, with love. Every paw, every segment, every serrated edge of the jaws, vertical eyes, breathing holes on the back, a tail with a mysterious growth. He signed the drawing, Mr. Crunch. Temperament, nervous, territorial. Presumed to be a loner. Left jaw damaged. Favorite food, unknown. Diet, unknown. Speed, high. Danger, extremely high. Status, do not disturb. For now. He closed the journal and lay down. All 8 eyes closed. The first month in the dungeon was over. He was alive. He was growing. He was learning. He was not alone. Somewhere in the journal, an answer awaited. Or perhaps it didn't. Somewhere below, something ancient was breathing. Up above, people lived who didn't know that on the 200th floor, a little spider was drawing portraits of monsters and giving them affectionate nicknames. He was falling asleep. The colony was tapping behind the wall, quietly, rhythmically. All was calm. All was calm. All was calm. On the 40th day, Jay killed Mr. Crunch. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. The creature had found his nest, not by accident. It was hunting. Its vertical slit eyes saw better in the dark than his ate, and it was following a trail. His trail. Jay felt a vibration 20 seconds before it appeared. All 20 signal threads rang out at once. Heavy, fast, 6 legs. Mr. Crustic. He was heading toward the nest, not past it, toward it. The colony of blind spiders erupted with signals. 3 long ones in a row. Great danger. 3 long ones in a row. 3 long ones in a row. The spiderlings were hiding. The queens were shielding the cocoons with their bodies. The guards lined up in a row. 12 blind spiders the size of a pea against a creature half a meter long. They would be dead in 3 seconds. Jay couldn't let that happen. He darted out of the nest, down, along the wall, quickly. Mr. Crunch had already entered the corridor before the fork. His mandibles were open. The breathing holes on his back were pulsing rapidly. He was agitated, hungry, aggressive. Jay stood between him and the nest, a rat-sized spider against a predator the size of a large cat. The odds were bad. Very bad. But Jay knew this creature. A month of observation. Every detail recorded, every weakness noted. The left mandible was weaker than the right, an old injury. The muscles had healed unevenly. The breathing holes on its back were open, unprotected. Active ventilation meant high oxygen consumption. cut off its breathing, and it would suffocate faster than a centipede. The tail appendage. Jay had studied it last week. Not a stinger, a sensory organ. The creature used it like an antenna. It was feeling its way through space. Losing its tail meant losing its sense of direction. 3 weaknesses, 3 points of attack. There was no time for a trap. The creature was here and now. But Jay had his web. And new threads, 5 types, and speed, and a distributed nervous system that thought with its entire body. Mr. Crunch lunged forward. Its jaws snapped. Jay moved to the right, not with a jump, with a slide. His legs carried him along the wall as if on rails. The creature spun around, quickly, but Jay was faster. Accelerated nerve conduction. His body dodged before his brain even registered the attack. He fired a structural thread, stiff, quick-setting, and stretched it across the corridor at the height of the creature's paws. He ran to the other wall, stretched a second one, a third, not a net. Traps, tripwires. Mr. Crunch charged again. Its front paws snagged the first thread. The stiff thread didn't snap. It yanked its paw sideways. The creature lost its balance for a split second. That was enough. Jay jumped. Not onto its back, onto its tail, onto the sensory protuberance. All 4 paws clamped down. His chelicerae sank into the base of the protuberance. The venom flowed. A neurotoxin. Fast-acting, concentrated. The growth twitched, went limp. Mr. Crunch howled, not with a voice, but with a vibration. The entire corridor shook. The creature spun around, trying to shake him off. Jay held on. The chelicerae were deep. The venom was flowing. The growth was dying. The creature lost its bearings. It began thrashing against the walls, chaotically. Jay let go of the tail and darted toward the ceiling. He released the shock-absorbing thread, hooked it onto the vault. He hung there. He swayed. Mr. Crunch was thrashing about below, blindly. Its tail sensor wasn't working. Its eyes were designed for a direct line of sight, not a panoramic view. It had lost track of Jay. But it hadn't lost its aggression. It was slamming its jaws against the walls, shattering the stone, destroying the passageway. Jay waited, counting the seconds. The creature was running out of breath. Its active ventilation system was working at full capacity. The breathing holes on its back opened and closed at a frantic rate. It was running out of oxygen. Its muscles were seizing up. Its movements were slowing down. After 3 minutes, Mr. Crunch stopped. He stood still. He was breathing, heavily. His jaws were half open. Its paws were trembling. It was exhausted, but alive, and still dangerous. Jay climbed down the thread, quietly. He approached from behind, from above, toward the dorsal breathing holes. Large, open, defenseless. He released the sticky trapping thread, aimed carefully, sealed the first opening, the second, the third, quickly, precisely, just as a surgeon closes wounds. The creature twitched. It sensed it, but it was too late. Jay sealed the 4th and 5th. All 5 breathing holes were closed. Mr. Crunch was suffocating, slowly, painfully. Its paws buckled. Its body slumped to the floor. Its jaws scraped against the stone. Its tail thrashed. To no avail. The sensor was dead. Breathing had stopped. 5 minutes later, it stopped moving. Jay sat on the ceiling and looked down. All 8 eyes. The creature he'd been watching for a month lay dead. Mr. Crunch. Nervous temperament, loved sweets. He'd never find out if Mr. Crunchy liked sweets. He'd made it up, wrote it in his journal as a joke. Now it was an epitaph. Jay climbed down to the body, examined it. His diagnostic gaze was in full swing. The anatomy unfolded like a textbook. Muscular structure, nervous system, organs, glands, bones. This creature had bones, not chitinous plates. Real bones. An internal skeleton beneath an external shell. A hybrid. An arthropod with elements of a vertebrate. Nothing like this existed on Earth. Nothing like this could exist on Earth. A product of the underworld. A product of millennia of devouring everything in sight. Jay began to eat. Deliberately, slowly. First, he chose the respiratory system. Not the lungs, not the trachea. That third system he couldn't classify. Active respiratory chambers with muscular walls. They pumped air like pumps. More efficient than textbook lungs, more efficient than trachea. He ate and thought. I need endurance. I need to breathe better, deeper, longer. The body responded. Warmth in his chest, familiar. The mutation began. Second, he chose the eyes, vertical slits. They saw in the dark better than his 8 round ones, but he didn't want to change his own eyes. He wanted to add to them. He ate the eye tissue and thought. An additional range, not a replacement, an expansion, infrared, thermal vision. His body responded again, a tingling behind his eyes. He consumed the rest as fuel, meat, fat, protein, lots of protein. His body demanded building material. The molt would be serious. He could already feel it. 2 major mutations at once, breathing and vision. It would be a difficult transformation. He was preparing. He moved his supplies to the nest. He reinforced the walls. He doubled the signal network. He left a signal for the colonies, 3 long ones and a new one. One he'd devised specifically. Short, long, pause, 3 short ones. I'm molting. Stand guard. They understood, or at least he hoped they did. The molting began on the 43rd day and lasted 4 days, the hardest one yet. His body was undergoing a profound transformation. His book-like lungs cracked and disintegrated. New structures grew in their place, chambers with muscular walls, active, pulsating. The pain was so intense that he would lose consciousness. He'd come to, then lose it again. His eyes were changing too. Not their shape, something inside. Receptors, new cells behind the old lenses. When he came to on the 5th day, the world was different. He breathed and felt the air entering him powerfully, fully, deeply. Every breath filled his body with oxygen all the way to the tips of his paws. He could run without gasping for air. He could fight without getting tired. He could spin for hours without feeling exhausted. His eyes. He closed his usual 8 and opened up a new perception. The world took on a different kind of color. Not red, blue, green. Warm. Cold. The walls were cold. The mushrooms were slightly warmer. The air from the depths was warm. The colony's trail on the rock, warm spots. He could see heat. The infrared spectrum. Not full-fledged thermal vision, not quite that clear, but enough to see living things in complete darkness. Enough so that no one could sneak up on him unnoticed anymore. He had grown again. Now the size of a large rat, almost the size of a kitten. His shell had darkened. It had become harder. His camouflage had become more complex, not just gray-brown. Now the pattern changed, depending on the lighting. In the light of the mushrooms, it was gray. In the dark, almost black. Adaptive camouflage. It's not a chameleon, but close, Jay wrote in his journal. Day 47. Status after the 3rd molt. Size, large rat. Mutations, active respiration plus thermal vision plus adaptive camouflage. Bonus. 5 types of silk, no changes. Nervous system, stable. Chelicerae neurotoxin effective against large targets. Drawing, self-portrait. An 8-eyed spider. Dark, angular, beautiful. He signed it J. Hahn, version 3.0. A month and a half. Alive. 50th day. Jay stood at the edge of a cliff that hadn't been there yesterday. The corridor ended in a vertical drop. Deep. Thermal vision showed warm air rising from below. Far below. The chasm led to the next floor, or several floors down. He couldn't determine the depth. Too far. But the air from below smelled different, heavier, older, with a hint of something sweet. That very same liquid that had been flowing up the walls. The blood of the dungeon. He didn't climb down. He noted the opening in his journal and returned. He didn't need to go deeper. He needed to expand his territory on his own level, horizontally, to map it out, to understand the ecosystem as a whole, not just a fragment. Over the next 10 days, he explored everything he could during the day. The level was enormous, not flat, not linear. A three-dimensional labyrinth of corridors, chambers, chasms, and ascents. Some chambers were flooded with water, underground lakes, warm, with their own fauna. Something was swimming in them, something with fins and jaws at the same time. He didn't go into the water. Other chambers were dry and hot, thermal zones. Red mushrooms grew there, bright, poisonous. The fauna was tough, armored, aggressive. He didn't go in there either. But he took notes. He recorded everything. His field journal was bursting with sketches. 42 species, 8 types of biomes, 3 food chains. A map covering 3 kilometers in every direction, with danger markers, with migration routes, with predator schedules. It was real fieldwork. The kind that once made his heart race in Oregon when he discovered a new population in an unfamiliar forest. Only this forest was an underground labyrinth, and the populations were monsters, and his heart was a pump made of hemolymph. But the feeling was the same, the pure joy of discovery. On the 60th day, he found a second nest of social spiders. Not his colony, another one. These weren't blind. They could see. Small, reddish, aggressive, territorial. They controlled the intersection of 3 corridors and killed anything that tried to pass through. Jay watched them for 3 days. Their vibrational language was different, faster, sharper. More signals of aggression, fewer signals of cooperation. A different culture, a different strategy. His colony survived by avoidance, this one through territorial control. Both approaches worked. Both came at a cost. He didn't make contact, too risky. These spiders didn't know the clear the way signal. They knew the kill the stranger signal. He circled their territory along the upper crevices and marked it on the map. In red, danger zone, do not enter. On the 65th day, he heard a sound he'd never heard before. Not a vibration, not a screech, not a rustle. A voice. A human voice. Distant, distorted by an echo, but a voice. Words. In a language he didn't understand. But the intonation was recognizable. Fear. Pain. A cry for help. Jay froze on the ceiling, all 8 eyes open, thermal vision activated. Far ahead in the corridor, heat was moving, human heat. A body temperature higher than that of any creature in the underground, 37 degrees plus or so. A human. A living human. On the 200th floor, it was impossible. The adventurer's border fortress stood on the 50th floor. Almost no one went below the 100th floor. The 200th floor was a blank spot. No one went there. But someone was here. And that someone was screaming. Jay moved toward the sound, carefully, along the ceiling, in the shadows. The camouflage worked. He was part of the stone, invisible. After 200 meters, he saw her. A person. A woman. Young. Red hair matted with blood and dirt. Leather armor torn on her left side. Ribs. He could see her ribs, not sticking out, but the outline was irregular. Fractures, at least 2. She was lying against the wall, her left arm pressed against her side, her right hand clutched a short sword. Useless. The blade was snapped in half, blood all around her. Her blood. And marks. Claw marks, large ones. Something had driven her here. Something had wounded her. Something had left. Or maybe not. Jay scanned the hallway with thermal vision. Empty. Not a single heat signature besides the woman's. The creature was gone. Or waiting around the corner. He couldn't be sure. The woman had stopped screaming. She was breathing heavily, hoarsely. Air whistled through her damaged ribcage. A pneumothorax. Maybe. If a broken rib had pierced the pleura, air would be escaping into the chest cavity and pressing on her lung. Without help, she would die. Not from bleeding, from suffocation. Jay sat on the ceiling and thought. He was a spider. She was a human. Humans kill monsters. That's their job. She's an adventurer, a hunter of creatures like him. If she sees him, she'll try to kill him, even wounded, even dying. Instinct, training, fear. He could leave, go back to the nest, write it down in his journal. Witness the death of a member of Homo sapiens on the 200th floor. Presumed cause of death, tension pneumothorax resulting from multiple rib fractures. He could have. And part of his brain, the spider-like part, the reptilian part, the ancient part, was telling him exactly that. Get out of here. It's none of your business. You're prey. She's a predator. Let him die. But the other part, the human part, the one that had crawled into an overturned car on a highway at night, the one that hadn't checked to see if the driver was breathing, that part said no. Jay climbed down the wall, quietly, slowly. He approached from the side the woman wasn't looking at. She was lying face down toward the hallway, waiting for the creature, or for death. He approached from behind, stopped a meter away, looked, a diagnostic gaze, not at a monster, at a human. It worked. Differently, more slowly, but it worked. Skeletal structure, 2 broken ribs, the 6th and 7th on the left, displaced inward. Probable pleural damage, compensatory breathing. The right lung is working at full capacity, the left is compromised. Bleeding from a wound on the side, not arterial, venous, slow, but if left unchecked, fatal within a few hours. Spine, curvature, not a trauma, congenital, scoliosis, left-sided. Thoracic region, moderate severity, long-standing. She had lived with it her whole life. Jay got to work, without thinking, just acting. He pulled out the silk, not fishing line, not a signal cord, medical silk. A thin, soft thread, almost weightless, hypoallergenic. He didn't know it was hypoallergenic. He hoped so. Spider silk is biocompatible. He'd read the studies. It had been used in experimental surgery to suture nerves. He began weaving. A brace. Not a simple one, not a bandage. A corset. With stiff ribs made of structural thread where support was needed. With a soft lining of shock-absorbing thread where it touched the skin. With a precise fit. He saw her body with a diagnostic eye. He saw the scoliosis. He saw how her spine was curved. He saw how her ribs were asymmetrically positioned due to the curvature. He wove the corset specifically for her body. Not a one-size-fits-all. Just for her. It took an hour. The woman lost consciousness 20 minutes in. Her breathing grew very weak. He was in a hurry. But he didn't lose his precision. Every loop of thread was in its place. Every knot was perfectly calibrated. When the corset was ready, he gently placed it against her left side. He wrapped it around her. He tightened it, gently. The corset's structural ribs aligned perfectly along the broken bones. They held them in place, prevented movement, prevented further displacement. The cushioning lining settled against her skin, gently, without pressure on the wound. He covered the wound separately, with a thin silk film, like a bandage, tightly, air-tightly. The bleeding stopped. The pressure in the chest cavity stabilized. Her breathing evened out. Just a little. But it evened out. Her left lung had room to breathe. It began to function. Not at full capacity, but it was working. Jay stepped back. He looked at his work. The corset fit perfectly, like a second skin. It accounted for every curve of her body, every rib, every vertebra, even her scoliosis. The corset didn't just hold the fractures in place. It supported her spine in a way that none of the armor she'd worn before had ever done. She'd breathe easier when she came to, not just because her ribs were stabilized, because of the back support she'd never told anyone about. Jay rose to the ceiling. He moved back 10 meters. He sat down. He stretched a signal thread toward the spot where she lay. If anyone came, he would sense it. He would keep watch. Until she woke up. Until she could move. Until she left. She mustn't see him. She mustn't know that a spider had saved her. That was his plan. He sat on the ceiling and looked down with 8 eyes at the red-headed girl in his silk corset. And for the first time in 2 months in the dungeon, he wasn't thinking about survival. Not about mutations, not about food chains. He was thinking about how she had red hair and labored breathing and scoliosis that she'd never told anyone about. And that he'd made something for her. Not a weapon, not a trap. Something just for her. Her name was Hannah. He found that out when she came to and started talking to herself. People do that when they're scared. They call themselves by name. Come on, Hannah. Get up, Hannah. Don't die here, Hannah. She was speaking a language Jay didn't know, but a name is a name. Hannah. She felt the corset. She froze. Her fingers traced the silk threads, the stiff boning, the soft lining. She didn't understand what it was, where it came from, who made it. But she felt that it was easier to breathe, that the boning wasn't moving, that the wound wasn't bleeding. She sat up, slowly, with effort. She looked around. A hallway. Darkness. Mushrooms on the walls. No one there. She looked at the corset again, touched it, pulled at it. It wouldn't come off. It fit like a part of her body. She said something, quietly. One word. Jay didn't understand the word, but he understood the tone. Gratitude, mixed with bewilderment. She stood up, staggering. She picked up the broken sword, a useless piece of iron, but familiar. Her hand knew what to hold. She walked, slowly, back the way she'd come. Upward, toward the surface, toward the people. Jay followed her along the ceiling. 3 hours. She didn't know he was there. She didn't look up. People rarely look up. She walked, stopped, breathed, chewed on something from her pocket. Dried roots. She kept going. 3 times along the way, she encountered small predators, creatures the size of a dog, fast, fanged, but cowardly. They attacked only the wounded and the weak. Hannah was wounded and weak. She didn't see them. They came from the side, out of the shadows. Jay saw them, thermal vision. Red spots against the cold stone background. He took care of them before they got close. Quietly, quickly. A leap from the ceiling. Chelicerae into the occipital joint. Neurotoxin. 3 seconds. Silence. He dragged the bodies into the side passages. She didn't notice. 3 small predators in 3 hours. 3 corpses in the side passages. 1 living spider on the ceiling. 1 living girl down below. By the 4th hour, she reached the passage that led upward. A steep ascent. Steps carved into the stone, old, worn away. Adventurers had passed this way, long ago. But they had passed. This was the path upward. Hannah stopped at the ascent. She turned around, looked back, into the darkness. She sensed it. She didn't see it. She didn't hear it. She sensed it, that someone had been nearby the whole 3 hours. She said something into the darkness, a few words. Jay didn't understand, but he remembered the sounds. Then she turned and began to climb, slowly, step by step. The corset held her steady. Her breathing was even. She was leaving. Jay sat on the ceiling and watched as her red-haired crown disappeared into the passageway leading upward. When she was gone, he climbed back down, to the spot where she had turned and spoken those words into dark. Her footprint remained on the stone, a drop of blood, dry, and a scent, human, warm, not chitinous, not sour, warm. He wrote in his journal. Days 65-66. Contact with a human. Hannah, presumably a scout. Age approximately 20-something. R. Redhead. Left-sided thoracic scoliosis. 2 fractured ribs, the 6th and 7th on the left. Probable pneumothorax. Stabilized. Silk corset brace with scoliosis correction. Status. Went upstairs. Alive. A drawing. Not an anatomical diagram. A portrait. A face. Closed eyes. Red strands of hair on her forehead. Hoarse breathing. A book spine clenched between her teeth. He spent a long time drawing this portrait, longer than he did on Mr. Krustik. Then he closed his diary and returned to the nest. He spent the next 2 weeks working, hard, methodically, hunting, eating, growing, mapping. He was expanding his territory. His colony of blind spiders was growing too. 200 individuals. They controlled the corridors around his nest. His signal network already covered 50 meters in every direction. He was the center. They were the periphery. Together, they were an organism. Small, but an organism. On the 70th day, an answer appeared in the diary. Not right away. He flipped through the entries and saw it, between the pages. Someone else's handwriting. That very one. Similar to his, but not his. The answer to his question. Who are you? Brief. 3 sentences. The author called himself by a name that Jay couldn't read, the letters blurred. As if the diary wouldn't let him see the name in its entirety. But the gist was clear. He was just like him. A stranger. A spider. On this very floor. A long time ago. A very long time ago. He didn't specify when. He wrote that time doesn't work the same way here as it does up above. He wrote that he'd reached the bottom, to the point where he was still breathing. And that it wasn't the enemy, it was a prisoner, just like him, just like Jay. The entry cut off. Not in the middle of a word like the first one, in the middle of a thought. As if the author had paused to think and never returned, or couldn't return. Jay reread it 10 times. A prisoner. The thing that breathes at the bottom isn't the dungeon's master, it's the dungeon's prisoner. The world had imprisoned it here, and the dungeon captures souls from other worlds to feed the prisoner. Jay isn't an anomaly. Jay is food. Food that has learned to think. He closed the journal, opened it, wrote a reply, a long one, a detailed one. Everything he knew, everything he'd seen, a map, species, food chains, the organic nature of the walls. Hannah, Mr. Crunch, the colony, everything. If that other one could read, then let him read. Let him know that Jay is here, that Jay is alive, that Jay isn't going to be food. On the 78th day, he found a token. Metal, tarnished, on a chain, stuck in an old spiderweb. Not his spiderweb, someone else's. Ancient, dried up, almost crumbling. The token hung in a crack in the 78th section of his map, deep inside, in a place he'd wandered into by accident, while tracking a new species of beetle. He removed the token, examined it. An unfamiliar metal, an engraving, symbols, numbers, a name. He couldn't read the name, but he recognized the symbol, a gray compass, stylized, with 4 arrows. A guild emblem, the same one that had been on the scraps of Hannah's gear. She'd worn the same symbol on her shoulder, the gray compass. The guild. This token had belonged to someone from her guild, someone who'd gone down to the lower levels and never returned. Jay placed the token in its slot, a special silk pouch. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Not for himself. For Hannah. If she ever came back. If he could ever give it back. He wrote it down in his journal. A gray compass guild token, found in Sector 78, in an old cobwebbed corner. Owner unknown, presumed dead on the lower levels. Preserved. A drawing, the token, in detail, with every scratch, with every symbol, with the chain. He looked at the drawing and thought. Somewhere up above, Hannah walks around in a corset made of spider silk and tells stories about the kind ghost of the lower levels. Or maybe she isn't. Maybe she's silent. Maybe she thinks she imagined it all, that the corset was woven from thin air, that the monsters killed themselves. Maybe. But he knew that wasn't true, and deep down, she knew it too. The 3rd month began with Jay shrinking to the size of a cat. Not a kitten, a full-grown cat, a house cat, the kind that sleeps on the couch and looks at its owner as if he were a servant. Only this cat had 8 eyes, venomous chelicerae, 5 types of silk, thermal vision, active chamber respiration, adaptive camouflage, and his own journal with 53 described species. He was no longer prey. He had become a mid-level predator. Not at the top. There were creatures larger than him. There were creatures more dangerous than him. But he no longer hid. He moved about, out in the open, across the floor, along the walls, across the ceiling, as he pleased. His camouflage made him semi-transparent. His speed made him elusive. His venom made him dangerous. His intelligence made him unpredictable. The colony had grown to 300 individuals. They occupied 3 chambers around his nest. The colony's territory had doubled in size. Jay helped. He didn't command. He helped. He showed them routes. He drove off predators. He brought back prey. The colony adapted to him. It incorporated him into its structure. He wasn't a queen. He wasn't a worker. He wasn't a guard. He was something for which there was no word in their language. Jay came up with the word himself. Architect. He built for them. He reinforced the nests with structural thread. He set up signal nets. He wove traps at the approaches. Their survival rate increased. Losses among the young were cut in half. They thrived. And Jay thrived along with them. On the 90th day, he made a decision that changed everything. He needed to go up. Not to the humans, not yet, but higher. To find out what lay between the 200th floor and the surface. To find out how the vertical structure of the underground worked. To find out which floors were passable and which were not. To map not just a fragment, but the entire world. He left the colony under the protection of the elders, a week's worth of supplies, signal networks on full alert. He headed upward. Through the same passageway Hannah had taken, steps carved into the stone, worn smooth, ancient. The ascent was long, floor after floor, each one different, each with its own ecosystem, its own predators, its own scent, its own temperature. He didn't linger. He walked. He observed. He took notes, but he didn't stop. This was a reconnaissance mission, not an expedition. A quick pass-through, the big picture. Details later. On the 119th floor, he saw signs of human presence. Old ones. Marks on the walls, carved symbols, arrows. Someone had marked the path. A long time ago. On the 181st floor, there were more traces. Fresher marks. Remnants of campfires. Debris from equipment. Someone had been here in recent years. Not living here, just passing through. On the 171st floor, he encountered the first living person since Hannah. He didn't run into them. He saw them. From the ceiling. A group. 4 people, armed, in armor, with torches. Adventurers. They were coming down, in formation, carefully, professionally. Scouts in front, 2 fighters in the center, a rear guard. They spoke quietly, in short phrases, the same language as Hannah's. Jay didn't understand the words, but he watched. His diagnostic gaze worked on people, worse than on arthropods, but it worked. The group's leader, a man around 30, heavy armor, a 2-handed sword on his back. His movements were economical, well-trained. An old injury to his left knee, he compensates for it, barely noticeable. The second fighter, a woman, light armor, 2 short blades, fast, agile, nervous. Her fingers were white from gripping the hilts. The third, a younger man, a staff, a mage, or something like a mage. His hands glowed, faintly, barely noticeable. He was some kind of spell, a defensive one, presumably. The fourth, the rear guard, an archer, a bow, a quiver, scanning the rear. A professional. His eyes are calm, his hands don't tremble. They walked right past him. They didn't notice him. Camouflage, size, the ceiling. People don't look up. Jay watched them go. They were heading down to the lower levels, to where he lived, to where his colony was, to where his nest was. If they reached the 200th level, they'd find his web, his traps, his structures, and they'd realize that living on the lower levels wasn't just a spider, but something intelligent, something that builds, thinks, plans. He had to decide, warn the colony, and whether to stop the people or cover his tracks, or let them see and face the consequences. He chose the first option. He turned around. He ran down, faster than he'd climbed. His new breathing mechanism was working. The active chambers pumped air. His muscles didn't tire. He ran for 2 hours without stopping. He reached the nest. The colony was quiet. He sent a signal, a new one he'd made up on the run. Long, short, long, pause, long, long. The humans are coming. He hoped they'd understand. They didn't understand. Of course they didn't. They had no signal for humans. Humans weren't part of their world. Humans were an abstraction, something from another universe, just as aliens would be to a human. Jay sprang into action. He covered his tracks. He cut the traps. He coiled up the signal threads. He moved his supplies. He hid everything that might look intelligent, unnatural, planned. It took a day. When the adventurers reached his section of the floor, they saw a typical dungeon. Mushrooms on the walls, insects, small predators, a watering hole. Nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of intelligent activity. Jay sat on the ceiling in camouflage and watched as they set up camp by the watering hole. His watering hole. They built a fire. The mage cast a protective perimeter, a glowing line on the floor. The archer took up his position. The fighters sat down to eat. They talked. Jay listened. He didn't understand, but he memorized everything. Every word, every inflection, every gesture. He was learning. Language is a code. A code can be deciphered, if you listen long enough, if you match words to actions, if you notice the repetitions. He spent 2 days with them, listening, watching, taking notes. The word they repeated most often when they pointed downward. A word for the underground, or for the depths, or for danger. He wrote it down. Then the second word, the one they said when they took out maps and ran their fingers over them. A word for a floor, or for a level, or for a layer. He wrote it down. The third word, the one they said to each other in the morning. A greeting, or a wish, or a prayer. He wrote it down. On the third day they left, back up to the surface. They hadn't found anything interesting. The 200th floor was too deep, too empty, too dangerous, too few resources. The risk was enormous. They left. Jay put everything back in place. Traps, nets, signal threads. He restored the nest. The colony emerged from its hiding places. Life returned to its rhythm. But something had changed. Jay sat in the nest and looked at his notes. 27 words, 3 days of observation. The beginning of a vocabulary. He knew he needed a language, not a vibrational one, a human one. If he ever wanted to go out among people, not as a monster, but as an equal, he needed to speak, to understand, to respond. He couldn't speak. He had no vocal cords, no lips, no tongue in the human sense. But he had silk, and chelicerae, and legs, and a brain that remembered English and was ready to learn another language. He began to learn. Every word in the journal, with context, with a sketch of the situation in which it was spoken, with a phonetic transcription of how he heard it. Slowly, with difficulty, but unstoppably. He wrote in his journal, Day 93. Contact with a group of adventurers, 4 people, not detected, traces concealed. Received a dictionary of 27 words. Hypothesis. After 6 months of observation, I'll be able to understand basic speech. In a year, I'll be able to try to communicate. The task is to find a way to communicate without a voice. Options. Writing on silk. Vibrational messages through objects. Sign language with my paws. The 3rd month was coming to an end. He was a spider the size of a cat, with a colony of 300, with a map of 10 floors, with a diary of 100 pages, with 27 words of a foreign language, with a dead adventurer's token in a silk pocket, with a portrait of a red-haired girl tucked between the pages, with a question about a captive at the bottom of the dungeon. He was small, but he wasn't alone. And he was building, not destroying, building. On the 100th day, Jay heard for the first time the word that changed everything. Wave. He didn't know what it meant, not then. He learned it from context. A group of adventurers. Another one. Not those 4, new ones. 6 of them. They descended to level 180 and set up camp. Jay watched from the ceiling. He listened. He took notes. They talked a lot. Loudly. Nervously. They repeated one word over and over, with a tone of fear. Wave. He wrote down the word. Then he wrote down the context. They were pointing down when they said it. They were saying numbers. 3. A year. Maybe 3 years. They were saying a word he already knew. Danger. And a new one. Army. Or multitude. Or flood. Something massive. Something coming from below. In 3 years. Jay added it to the dictionary. Wave. Presumably a massive phenomenon, associated with depth, associated with danger. Time frame of approximately 3 years. Instills fear in armed professionals. He returned to the 200th floor, to the nest. He lay down. He thought. Something was coming from below. Something massive. Something in 3 years. And that thing breathing at the bottom. Is it connected? He opened his journal to the page about the previous intruder. He reread it. A captive, not an enemy. A captive. If that thing breathing at the bottom is a captive, and if the wave is coming from below, then maybe the wave isn't an attack. Maybe it's a cry, a call, an attempt to get through. He jotted down the hypothesis. He closed the journal. He turned his attention to the pressing matter at hand. The pressing matter was new mutations. Jay planned his next molt the way an engineer plans a prototype. He knew what he wanted. Size. He needed to grow to the size of a dog. A large dog. Size gave mass. Mass gave striking power, gripping power, the strength of silk. The larger the spider, the thicker the thread, the sturdier the structures, the more he could build and defend. But size required fuel. A lot of fuel. Protein, calories, biomass. He hunted more intensely, every day, twice a day. He caught everything he could eat: beetles, woodlice, small predators, even a young centipede, 1/2 meter long. He killed it with a trap in 3 minutes. Routine. He ate with purpose. The muscle fibers of large predators for muscle mass, the chitin from woodlice for shell strength, nerve tissue to maintain speed. Every bite with purpose. Every meal a project. On the 110th day, he began to molt. His 4th molt. He prepared for it as if for a siege. 5 days' worth of supplies, triple protection for the nest, the colony on high. 120 blind spiders formed a ring around his chamber. They were tapping. All was quiet. All was quiet. The molt lasted 3 days, painful, profound. His entire body was being rebuilt, not his organs, his frame, his skeleton, muscles, proportions. He was changing scale. When he stood on his new legs, the ceiling of the chamber seemed lower, because he had grown. The size of a large dog, a Labrador, maybe bigger. His legs reached from the floor to table height, if there were tables here. His carapace was dark gray, almost black, with silvery veins. Beautiful. If you can call a spider beautiful. His chelicerae had lengthened. Their venom had become more potent. A single dose could paralyze a creature 3 times his size. His camouflage had become more sophisticated. Now he could change his shade in a matter of seconds. Not complete invisibility, but close. And the silk. Type 6. New. He didn't know what to call it. The thread was warm, not warm to the touch, warm in essence. It retained the body temperature of whoever was wrapped in it. An insulating thread. For clothing, for bandages, for shelters. For people who were cold on the lower levels. He thought about this while he ate. Not consciously, subconsciously. He thought about Hannah. About how she had been shivering when she lay unconscious, how her fingers had been blue from the cold. And his body responded. It gave him thread that provided warmth. The system reacted to his intention, even to his subconscious thoughts. It was powerful and frightening. If the system gave him what he was thinking about, then every thought was a project. Every thought was changing his body. He had to be careful about what he thought about what he wanted, with what he dreams of. Because dreams can become flesh, and flesh is irreversible. He wrote it down. Sixth type of silk. Insulating. Thermoactive. Retains heat. The cause is presumably a subconscious intention while eating. Important. Control the thought process while eating. The mutation depends not only on food choices and conscious intent, it depends on everything in the mind. He underlined it 3 times. On the 120th day, Jay began his first major expedition downward, not upward, downward, toward that which breathes. He wasn't going to reach the bottom, not this time. He intended to reach the boundary of the organic zone and study it, to understand its structure, to understand its rules, to understand whether it was possible to survive there. He walked down a descending corridor. The rock beneath his paws gradually changed. It became softer, warmer. The mushrooms disappeared. The light disappeared. Complete darkness. His thermal vision worked. The walls glowed, heat, steady, pulsating, alive. After a kilometer, he entered a zone where the floor ceased to be a floor. Beneath his paws was tissue, dense, elastic, covered with something wet. Slime or lubricant, like the inner lining of an organ. He was walking on someone's body. Literally. The walls contracted and expanded, rhythmically, like intestinal peristalsis. The dungeon was breathing. The dungeon was moving. The dungeon was alive. And it sensed him. He realized this when the walls contracted slightly tighter as he approached, not aggressively, reflexively, like a muscle contracting when an ant crawls across it. The dungeon sensed him, a tiny speck on its inner surface, a grain of sand in the body of a giant. Jay stopped. He placed a paw on the wall. He felt a pulse. Slow, deep, 1 beat every 12 seconds, like a whale's. A slow metabolism, an enormous mass, incredible antiquity. He stood there, listening to the heart of the world. Not a heart, a pulse. But to him, it was a heart. A thought flashed through his mind, absurd, impossible, but persistent. If the underground is a living organism, and if the wave is its action, then maybe the wave doesn't have to be fought. Maybe the wave can be treated. He turned around and walked back, slowly, pondering every step, every thought, every hypothesis, writing it down, drawing diagrams, arrows, questions. When he returned to the Nesdo, a surprise awaited him. An object lay on a rock by the watering hole. Metal, shiny, not from the dungeon, from the surface. A knife, small, folding, with a bone handle. Next to the knife, symbols were scratched into the rock, roughly, hastily. He couldn't read them. He didn't recognize the script. But next to the symbols was a drawing of a compass, a gray compass, with 4 arrows. Hannah. She had been here. She had returned. She had gone back down to the lower levels, alone, and left him a gift. A knife. A mask, a message he couldn't read. She knew he existed. She knew he was intelligent. She left him a tool. Not a weapon, a tool. As if she knew he needed a knife more than a sword. Jay picked up the knife. He opened it. The blade was sharp, clean, good steel. He could hold it with his 2 front paws. Awkward, but he could. The knife smelled of her hands. Warm, human. The cigarette butts she'd chewed on instead of smoking. He placed the knife next to the token in the silk pocket. 2 objects. The token for her. The knife from her. A connection. Subtle, silent, but a connection. He wrote it down in his journal. Day 120. Hannah returned. Left a knife and a message. Not spotted in person. Presumably came down alone. Knows of my existence. Considers it reasonable. Left a tool, not a weapon. A drawing. A knife. In detail. Every scratch. Every curve of the blade. A bone handle. A folding mechanism. He drew a small compass next to it. Gray. With 4 hands. The 4th month. A spider the size of a dog, with a knife in his pocket, with the pulse of the world in his ears, with a red-headed girl somewhere above, with an army of blind spiders behind him, with a wave on the horizon, with everything that still lay ahead. On the 150th day, Jay spoke to a human for the first time. Not with his voice, with silk. He spent a month preparing. He learned 120 words of the local language. Not fluently, clumsily, with mistakes, but enough to form simple sentences. The problem was in the delivery. He had no mouth to speak with, no hands to write with, but he had paws and a structural thread that froze in the air. He learned to weave letters. Local letters that he had copied from maps and inscriptions left by adventurers. Each letter made of stiff thread, secured to a flat silk plate, like a sign, like a plaque. He could weave a word in 3 minutes, a phrase in 10, slowly, but legibly. Hannah came again. He was waiting for her. He knew she'd come. She left traces, marks on the walls, the same symbols as last time. He'd memorized some of them. One mark repeated at every turn, an arrow. It marked the path to him. She was making her way down purposefully, not like a guild scout, like someone who wants to return to the place where a miracle happened. Jay had prepared a meeting place, not his own nest, a neutral chamber, clean, lit by mushrooms, with water, with warmth. He hung silk signs on the walls. The first one said, "Don't be afraid." The second one said, "I'm a friend." The third one said, "The corset is me." Simple words. The grammar was probably terrible, but the meaning was clear. He hid on the ceiling, in camouflage. He waited. She entered the chamber 2 hours later, alone, just as he'd thought. A torch in her hand. A new sword at her belt, intact. His corset on her body. She was still wearing his corset. 5 months. It hadn't fallen apart. She held it together. The contraption worked. She saw the signs. She stopped. She read the first one. She read the second one. She got to the third one and froze. The corset is me. She raised her hand and touched the silk on her side, slowly, like touching a scar or an amulet. She said something, quietly, into the emptiness of the chamber. Jay listened. He understood half of it. She was asking who you are, where you are, why. He came down, not from the ceiling, from the wall, slowly, along the stone. All 8 legs visible, all 8 eyes open. Camouflage off. Full form. A spider the size of a large dog. Dark, with silvery streaks. Chelicerae retracted, legs tucked in, the most non-aggressive posture possible. Hannah saw it. Her hand shot toward her sword. Instinct, training. Her fingers gripped the hilt. But she didn't draw it. She stood and watched. He stood and watched. 8 eyes staring at 2. A spider and a human. 5 seconds. 10. 20. She didn't strike. He didn't run. She took her hand off the sword, slowly. She said a word. 1. He knew that word. He'd learned it from context. It meant you. You. She recognized him, not as a monster, as the one who'd woven the corset, the one who'd killed the predators behind her back, the one who'd watched from the ceiling as she left, the kind ghost of the lower level. Jay raised his front paw, slowly. He lowered it onto the stone, gently, and tapped. Short, short, long. The way is clear. She didn't know this code, but she heard the rhythm. Not aggression, not a threat. A greeting. She sat down on the stone, right on the floor. She stuck the torch into a crack and began to speak. Slowly. The way you talk to a child, or to a foreigner, or to a creature that might understand or might not. Jay listened. He wrote down every word in his journal. He understood 1 out of every 3, but he understood the main point. She hadn't come to kill. She'd come to thank him. She'd come to search. She'd been searching for him for 5 months, ever since the day she woke up in the corset. She had survived. She made it to the camp on the 60th floor. She told them about the ghost. They didn't believe her, but she was still wearing the corset, a real one, made of a material no one had ever seen, stronger than skin, softer than silk, with a perfect fit that no master craftsman could have achieved. The camp blacksmith examined the corset and said it was impossible, that it wasn't the work of a human, that whoever had woven it knew anatomy better than any doctor. Hannah didn't argue. She knew. She returned, alone, without the guild's permission, without a squad. Because when she lay unconscious on the cold stone, someone invisible, had put something on her that accounted for her scoliosis. That very scoliosis she'd never told anyone about in her life. Someone had seen her for who she really was. Not a scout, not a fighter. A girl with a crooked spine. And hadn't turned away, hadn't walked past, had woven a corset for her. She spoke for half an hour. He listened. Then she fell silent. She looked at him. She waited for an answer. He wove a word, slowly, with his paws. From structural thread, 1 word. He attached it to the wall. She read it. She smiled. The word was her name. Hannah. He knew her name. She said something else. He made out 2 words, her name and a question. What's your name? He wove the answer, 2 symbols. Not in the local language, in the language he couldn't yet convey with letters. So he drew it. A spiderweb on the wall, a little spider with 8 eyes and a tiny heart next to it. 8 eyes, 1 heart. She couldn't have known what it meant, but she looked at the drawing, and for some reason her eyes filled with tears. She left 3 hours later, with a promise to return, with a new vocabulary of 30 words that Jay had written down with her help, with the drawing of a spider on the wall, which she traced with her fingers for a long time before leaving. He walked her to the stairwell, along the ceiling, just like last time. She knew he was there. This time she looked up. Half a year, 180 days. Jay was the size of a large dog. The courtyard consisted of 400 blind spiders. The territory covered 2 kilometers of the 200th floor. The dictionary contained 300 words of the local language, and he had people now. Hannah came every 2 weeks, not alone, at first by herself, then with Maylin, the blacksmith, the very one who said a corset was impossible. She wanted to see the master. Jay appeared to her. Maylin didn't grab for a weapon. She clutched her head. Then she sat down on the floor and was silent for a long time. Then she said 1 word that Jay already knew. Impossible. Then she asked him to show her how he spun. He showed her. She watched as his little legs released the thread, how the glands worked, how he tied knots, how the thread froze in place. Her eyes burned, not with fear, with the rapture of a craftsman. She saw a colleague, not a monster, a master. Mei Lin came a second time with a problem, her right hand, 3 fused fingers. Jay examined it with a diagnostic eye. The bones had fused incorrectly, the tendons were shortened, nerves were compressed by scar tissue. Constant pain. She'd been hiding it. She'd hold the hammer in her left hand when no one was looking. She'd change her grip 10 times a minute. He set to work. Not right away. First, he studied. For 2 visits, he just looked at her hand. He took notes, he drew diagrams, he calculated angles, he measured the range of motion. On the 3rd visit, he brought a finished prosthesis. Not metal, silk chitin, an exoskeleton glove. Inside were tendons made of shock-absorbing filaments. The frame was made of structural filaments. The lining was made of insulating material so her hand wouldn't get... Each finger moved independently. The mechanics compensated for the fusion. The 3 dead fingers were moved by the 2 living ones through a system of transmission threads. Mei Lin put on the glove. She clenched her fist, unclenched it, clenched it again. She picked up a stone. She lifted it, turned it, threw it, picked up another one, a heavier one. She lifted it. Her expression changed. First, disbelief, then surprise, then silence. Then she cried, silently, without a sound. Tears running down her cheeks, and that was all. She hadn't cried in 5 years, not since her hand had healed. She'd forgotten what it meant to hold an object without pain. Then Yuna came, a little healer from the church. Hannah brought her because Yuna was sick. Not just sick. Her skin burned from holy water, the very substance the church used to heal and bless. Yuna was a healer who couldn't touch the central instrument of her faith, a congenital allergy, rare, inexplicable. The church considered it a sign of impurity. They wouldn't grant her full ordination. They kept her in field work, far from the altar, far from prying eyes. Jay studied the problem. He asked Hannah to bring a sample of holy water, a tiny one in a sealed vial. He examined its composition with a diagnostic eye. The water wasn't just water. It contained an essence, crystallized manna from the underworld, processed by the church, purified, but not completely. The residual compounds were allergens, harmless to most people, deadly to Yuna. Her body reacted to a specific protein in the essence, a specific one, a rare one. Jay synthesized an enzyme from his own venom. The neurotoxin contained a component that broke down that very protein. He isolated it, purified it, mixed it with a silk fluid base. He produced an ointment, transparent, odorless, hypoallergenic. Yuna applied the ointment to her palm. She waited an hour. Hannah opened the vial. She dripped holy water onto Yuna's hand. 1 drop. Yuna closed her eyes. She braced herself for pain. There was no pain. The drop was absorbed. Her skin didn't redden, it didn't stun, it didn't crack. Yuna opened her eyes. She looked at her palm. Clean, unscathed. For the first time in her life, unscathed after holy water. She didn't cry. She smiled, quietly, like the sunrise. And she folded her hands as if in prayer. For the first time, without blood on her palms. Then Leah appeared. She didn't come on her own, she was brought in, a merchant's daughter, sent to the dungeon so she wouldn't get in her brother's way. Smart, cruel, with an icy politeness that cut like glass. She didn't want to see a monster. She came because Hannah said the silk master could make fabrics worth more than gold. Leah was thinking about contracts, about shipments, about money, about proving to her family that she was smarter than her brother. Jay listened to her. Or rather, he watched her talk to Hannah. Quickly, firmly. Numbers, terms, guarantees, business acumen. Cold, professional. But he saw something else. His diagnostic gaze was getting better and better at reading people. He saw how she clenched her fingers when she thought no one was watching, how she adjusted her coat on her narrow shoulders, how she hid the inkwell in her inner pocket and sometimes touched it like a talisman. The inkwell pen was old, copper, with initials, not hers, someone else's. Her mother, her grandmother, someone she loved who was no longer with her. Jay made her the coat, not a combat coat, not a commercial model. Everyday wear, made of insulating silk, warm, lightweight, tailored to fit her narrow shoulders, with an inside pocket made exactly to fit her inkwell. He'd noticed the size when she'd taken out the inkwell to write down the terms, with embroidery along the edge. Delicate, barely noticeable. A spiderweb pattern that mirrored the design on her inkwell, the very same one. The initials of an unknown woman woven into the silk. Leah unfolded the cloak. She looked at it. She put it on. The cloak fit perfectly, like a second skin. She slipped her hand into the inner pocket. The inkwell fit perfectly. She froze. She touched the embroidery along the edge. She recognized the pattern. Her face twitched for a second. Then it returned to its icy mask. But that second was enough. Jay saw it, with 8 eyes. All 8 saw the same thing. The girl whom no one ever chose first, for whom no one ever made something just for her. Not for appearances, not for a contract, for her. Then Irene came. She didn't come, she came on her own. No one brought her. A wild girl from the camp, half-breed, a second set of teeth, long nails, inhuman eyes. She just showed up in the cell one day, sat in the corner, stared at Jay, silently, for 2 hours. He stared back at her, a diagnostic gaze, a human foundation, but with an admixture. Chitinous inclusions in her nail plates, extra teeth of a non-human type, vertical pupils in dim light. A hybrid. A human and a creature from the lower levels. She didn't know what she was. People were afraid of her. Monsters rejected her. She was in between, neither here nor there. Jay looked at her with 8 eyes and saw not a mistake, not a freak, not an anomaly. A unique species, with its own taxonomy, with its own place in the classification. He opened his journal. He began to draw. Her. In detail. Just as he drew every species, with notes, with captions, with the wonder of a researcher facing a new discovery. He drew for a long time. She sat quietly. Then she approached. She looked at the drawing. She saw herself. Not a monster, not a mistake. A species, with a name, with a description, marked unique. She touched the drawing with the tips of her claws, gently, as one touches something fragile. Then she looked at Jay, and stayed. She just stayed. She didn't leave. She sat down beside him, silently, like an animal that has chosen its owner sits down beside it. He knitted her gloves, thin ones, made of soft silk, with slits. Her claws were hidden inside, but if she wanted to let them out, she'd clench her fist and the slits would open. Claws out. Ready. Her claws. Not hidden, not cut off. Tamed. She could be a human among humans, and a monster whenever she wanted, by her own choice. For the first time in her life, she was given a choice. Jay's court was gathering. 6 months in the dungeon. A spider the size of a dog. 400 blind spiders. 4 people. Hannah, Mei Lin, Yuna, Leah. And Audine, who never left, who slept by his nest, curled up on a bed of warm silk. He made things for each one, for everyone. Not one size fits all, personal. Each thread woven with a specific person in mind. On the 270th day, Sorsha arrived, not as a guest, as a hunter, a former inquisitor of the Bright Pillar, stripped of her rank, but she hadn't forgotten her skills. She had been tracking the eight-legged defilement for 3 months already, ever since the day the church heard rumors of an intelligent spider in the lower levels, of a master who weaves impossible things, of a monster around whom people gather. The church dispatched an order, 5 inquisitors, led by Cassian Vale, 38 years old, handsome, calm, a man of faith, not a fanatic. Worse, sincere. He truly believed he was killing out of mercy, that every monster was a disease of the world, that healing the world meant burning away the corruption. He had a reason. His sister, killed by a monster on the 30th floor, 12 years ago. He remembered her face every day, and every day he sharpened his sword. Sorsha traveled with the order, but separately. She didn't trust the church, not after she was ordered to burn down a village. She refused. She was stripped of her rank, but they didn't let her go. They sent her to do the dirty work, to track, to scout, to report. She was the best at surveillance because she was the best in combat and knew how those she was tracking thought. She found Jay first. Not a nest. Traces. A thread on the wall, structural, stiff, not natural. Man-made. She followed the threads like Ariadne's thread, and she came to the room where Jay was working. He was weaving a new corset for Hannah. The old one had worn out. 5 months of wear. Time for a replacement. He was sitting on the floor, spinning. His legs moved quickly. The thread lay evenly. He didn't hear Sorsha. For the first time in 9 months, his alarm system hadn't gone off. Sorsha knew how to bypass the traps. She stood in the passageway, a sword in her hand. She watched. A spider the size of a large dog sat on the floor and sewed a corset. It wasn't eating. It wasn't killing. It wasn't spinning a web. It was sewing a corset, with buttons made of chitin, with a soft lining, with stiffening ribs exactly where they were needed. She watched for 3 minutes. Then she sheathed her sword. Jay heard the click of the scabbard. He turned around. 8 eyes stared at the tall woman with graying temples and scars on her arms. They looked at each other. She said one word. He knew that word. Filth. He shook his head chest, slowly, from side to side. A gesture he'd invented to mean no. She saw the gesture. She understood. She narrowed her eyes. Then she looked at the corset in his paws. Then at the scars on her own arms. Old ones. Burns. From the church. Punishment for disobedience. They ached every day, especially before it rained. She said another word. He knew that one, too. It hurts. Jay set Hannah's corset aside. He approached her, slowly, within a paw's length. She didn't back away. He extended his front paw, touched her arm. The scar, gently, the way one touches a wound. She flinched, not from pain, from the touch. It had been a long time since anyone had touched her scars. It had been a long time since anyone had touched her at all. He began to spin, right on her arm. A thin layer of insulating silk, warm, soft. On top of that, a compress made of shock-absorbing thread soaked in an enzyme, the same one he'd made for Yuna, modified for burn-damaged tissue. The enzyme penetrated the scar tissue. It softened it. It relieved the tension. It reduced the pressure on the nerves. The pain receded, not immediately. Slowly. like the ebb of the tide. Sorsha stood there and felt the pain that had lived in her arm for 7 years slipping away. 7 years. Every day, every night, every hour. And now it was leaving. Beneath the spider's legs. Beneath the silk of the monster she had come to kill. She dropped to one knee, not out of weakness, out of habit. Just as she used to kneel before the altar. Only there was no altar. There was a spider with 8 eyes that was taking away the pain. She said 3 words. He understood all 3. "I'm staying here." Sorsha warned him about Cassian, through Hannah, through words that Jay already understood well enough. The Inquisitor is coming. 5 fighters, the best, with the Church's blessing, with weapons against monsters, with orders to destroy the 8-legged abomination and everyone who helps her. Anyone wearing Jay's belongings would be declared an accomplice. Hannah, Mei-Lin, Yuna, Leah, Arine, Sorsha. Everyone. Jay listened. He took notes. He thought. Then he closed his journal and began to prepare. Not for battle, for the encounter. He didn't want to kill Cassian. He understood Cassian. A man had lost his sister. He had found meaning in fighting what had killed her. He believed he was doing the right thing. If Jay had been born into this world, he might have become just like him. But the meeting was inevitable, and Jay had to prepare for it. He worked for 3 weeks. He wove, he built, he planned, he reconfigured the territory, every corridor, every cell, every passageway, a web everywhere. But not traps, a signaling network, a communication network, thousands of threads, each one leads to him. He'll see everything, every step every person takes on his territory. He equipped each of his people with gear, a new corset for Hannah, reinforced, with protection against stabbing blows, an upgraded prosthesis for Mei-Lin with a reinforced grip, a set of ointments for Yoon, just in case. Lee has a cloak with an inner layer that deflects light blows. Arine has new gloves, combat gloves with reinforced slits. Sorsha has a compress for every scar and a cloak, not a church one, but her own, with an inner layer that soothes the pain from the burns on her back. Every item is for a specific person, every thread woven with thought, every knot tied with care. He was the architect of the battlefield. He was the conductor. All that remained was to wait. Cassian arrived on the 310th day, exactly 1 year since Jay's awakening. A squad of Inquisitors climbed the stairs to the 60th floor, where the adventurers' camp was located. 5 fighters in white armor, with swords consecrated by the Church, with torches that burned with holy fire. Cassian led the way, tall, broad-shouldered, a calm face, light eyes, cold, not malicious, just confident. He knew he was doing the right thing, just as a surgeon knows he's cutting to save a life. They entered the camp and demanded that the accomplices of the taint be handed over. Jay knew about this. Sorsha had passed the word through Hannah. Hannah had passed it through Mei-Lin. Mei-Lin had passed it through Arine. A chain. His network. Not a spider's web. A human one. The camp fell silent. The adventurers stepped aside. No one wanted to get involved with the Inquisition. No one wanted trouble. Cassian called out the names. Hannah Reed, Mei-Lin Kim, Soyuna Park, Leah Morgan, Arine, Sorsha Day. 6 names, 6 accomplices, 6 sentences. They stepped forward, all 6 of them, without coordinating. Hannah first, followed by Mei-Lin, Yuna, Leah, Arine, Sorsha last. They lined up in front of Cassian, and one by one they took off Jay's clothes. Slowly, in silence. Hannah unfastened her corset. She set it down in front of her. Mei-Lin removed her prosthetic glove. Her Her right hand hung limply at her side. 3 fused fingers, useless without the silk exoskeleton. She placed the prosthesis on the stone. Yuna took out a jar of ointment, the last one. She set it down nearby. Leah took off her cloak, folded it neatly, set it down. Arine pulled off her gloves. Her claws were exposed. Long, inhuman. She set the gloves down and didn't hide her hands. She stood there with her claws exposed. This is who I am. This is what he accepted. Sorsha was the last one. She took off her cloak, his cloak, the only thing that eased the pain from the burns on her back. The pain returned instantly. Jay saw her shoulders tremble, saw her teeth clench, saw the knuckles of her fingers turn white. But she laid the cloak down, neatly, on the stone. 6 women, 6 items on the stone. 6 acts of renouncing the only thing that had been done for them personally. Cassian watched. His expression didn't change, but Jay, from the ceiling of the chamber, saw his eyes. Something flickered in them. For a second, less than that. Cassian raised his sword. The blade pointed at the items. One word. Burn. And then Jay stepped out of the shadows, not from the ceiling, from the passageway behind the Inquisitors' backs. They didn't notice. They didn't sense it. He moved along his threads, through his web, across the entire camp, and emerged behind them, standing at full height, a humanoid form. His last molt had taken place 2 weeks ago, the 5th, the most terrifying, the longest. 6 days. He chose his form, consciously. Human proportions, 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 additional pairs of limbs extending from his back, retractable. Straight torso, head, face. Not human, but with features. 8 eyes beneath a high forehead, mandibles retracted, mouth closed. A cloak, his own, made of all 6 types of silk, dark with silvery veins. A hood, human-sized, as tall as Cassian. He stood behind the Inquisitors, and they sensed him before they saw him. 4 of them turned around, swords at the ready. Cassian turned last, slowly, like a man who knew this moment would come. Jay stood there, 8 eyes beneath the hood. Calm, not aggressive, not frightened. Calm. He bent down, picked up Hannah's corset, walked over to her, silently. Put the corset back on her. Fastened it with his own hands, 2 human hands he hadn't had before. Fingers. 4 on each hand, not 5, but fingers. They fastened the buckle precisely and gently. He picked up Maylin's prosthesis, slipped it onto her arm. Maylin clenched her fist. 3 fingers moved again. He picked up Yuna's little jar, placed it in her palm, closed her fingers around it with his own. He picked up Lee's cloak, draped it over her shoulders, adjusted it. He picked up Arine's gloves, pulled them over her clawed hands. The claws retracted. Arine looked up at him. Her inhuman eyes were wet. The last one, Sorsha's cloak. He picked it up, walked over to her, draped it over her. The pain in her back subsided, instantly. Her shoulders relaxed. For the first time in a minute, in 7 years. Jay turned to Cassian. He knew enough words. He'd studied for a year. He'd been preparing for this moment. He spoke. Not with his voice. He had no voice. With a vibration. His body vibrated. His chest plate resonated. The sound was low, hoarse, inhuman. But the words were human. Simple. I'm sorry. These are my people. I made these things for them. If you want to take them, talk to me first. Silence. Absolute silence. The camp was silent. The adventurers were silent. The Inquisitors were silent. Cassian was silent. His sword was raised, but not to strike, to defend. A reflex. He looked at Jay, at the monster who spoke human words, who dressed people in clothes, who stood before him not as a beast, but as a father before his family. Cassian had seen monsters 1,000 times. He'd killed hundreds. Not a single one of them had apologized. Not a single one had said, "My people." Not a single one had fastened the buckles on a wounded girl's corset with fingers that trembled with care. Cassian lowered his sword. He didn't sheath it. He lowered it. He said one word, quietly. Jay understood why. Jay answered, "Because they're freezing. Because they're in pain. Because they deserve something made just for them." Cassian was silent for a long time. Then he sheathed his sword. He turned to his men. He said 2 words. Jay didn't understand the second one, but he understood the first. "Let's go." The Inquisitors left, not all of them. Cassian lingered. He turned around. He looked at Jay for a long time. Then he said a phrase that Jay understood completely. "I'll be back." Not as a threat, as a promise. As the promise of a man who, for the first time in his life, wasn't sure he was right. He left. And on the 200th floor, in the darkness deep within the dungeon, for the first time in 1,000 years, something stirred. It didn't sigh. It didn't flinch. It opened its eyes, because it sensed it. Up above, someone from its flock had just referred to itself as I, and said, "My people." And that was new. It was the first time in 1,000 years. 2 years had passed. 730 days since the 8-eyed grape had hung on a thread in the darkness of the 200th floor. Jay stood at the edge of the chasm leading to the core and looked down. His people stood beside him. Hannah was on his right. Her red hair was tied back in a bun, a 4th-generation corset, reinforced, lightweight, with an integrated signal thread that connected her to Jay at a distance of up to a kilometer. She was breathing steadily. She was no longer afraid of the depths, the paradox of a scout who fears heights, but not the abyss. Mei Lin was on the left, a hammer in her hands, a new one, with a handle wrapped in silk tendon. A 5th-generation prosthesis, 7 fingers, more than a healthy hand has. Each moved independently. With them she forged weapons that would be impossible to forge with just 5 fingers. She didn't smoke a pipe. She'd quit. She said her hands should smell of silk, not smoke. Yuna was behind her, quiet, wearing glasses, carrying a bag full of ointments and enzymes. The church had excommunicated her 3 months ago. For heresy. For treating people with spider venom ointment. For praying without holy water. For having a faith quieter and deeper than their dogma. She didn't cry. She said that God isn't in the water. God is in intention. And she continued to heal. Leah stood slightly to the side, a 3rd-generation cloak, with a pocket for an inkwell, with new embroidery that Jay had added, a little spider in the corner, her talisman. She no longer spoke of contracts. She spoke of trade routes through the underground, about the world between the floors, about an economy not based on killing. She was the first to suggest trading with monsters instead of killing them for materials. Arine was crouching at the edge of the chasm, 6th-generation gloves, claws extended. She had grown up. She looked 16 or 17, maybe older, maybe younger. She never found out her age. But she knew her species. Jay had given her a taxon. He'd written it down in his journal, drawn it, described it. She carried a copy of that page in her pocket, crumpled, worn. Her metric. Her birth certificate from the only being who had looked at her and seen not a mistake, but a revelation. Sorsha brought up the rear. A cloak that took away the pain, a sword on her back. She didn't serve the church. She served him, not as a god, as a commander, as a man she trusted. because he was the only one in her life who hadn't asked her to burn anything. And Cassian. Yes, Cassian. He stood apart from the group, without white armor, in plain armor, without the symbols of the church. He returned as promised, 6 months later, alone, without a squad. He came to Jay and said, "I don't understand what you are, but I want to understand." They talked for 3 nights. Jay told him everything through the words he'd learned over the course of a year, through silk tags, through drawings in his diary, about the captive at the bottom, about the wave, which isn't an attack but a cry, about the dungeon, which is a living organism, about the strays it catches and processes into food, about himself, a man from another world, an entomologist who painted ant jaws in watercolor and explained why you shouldn't flush a spider down the toilet. Cassian listened for a long time. Then he took the medallion with the church's symbol off his neck. He placed it on a rock and said, "If you're right, then everything I believed is a lie. And if you're right, then I have to see it for myself." He went with them, to the core, to that which breathes at the bottom. An army followed them, not an army in the usual sense. Jay's court. 600 blind spiders, 24 tamed predators, 40 adventurers who believed. A column of living beings, people and monsters, together, side by side, not in battle, on a journey. Jay walked ahead, in full humanoid form, his hood thrown back, 8 eyes open, all 8. He was no longer hiding. They descended for 3 days, through the organic zone, through pulsating walls, through warm darkness, through the scent of ancient blood flowing upward through the capillaries of the living world. The dungeon sensed them. The walls contracted, not aggressively, warily, like a body tenses when something unfamiliar. But it didn't attack. Jay walked, touching the walls with his paws, the ones on his back, the extra ones. He left a vibration on them, rhythmic, calm, short, long. The path was clear. The underground listened. On the 3rd day of their descent, they arrived. A chamber, huge, the size of a cathedral. The ceiling was lost in the darkness. The walls pulsed, slowly, rhythmically. 1 beat every 12 seconds. The heart of the world. In the center of the chamber, on a floor of living tissue, lay a creature. It wasn't just lying there, it was embedded, woven in, part of the floor, the walls, and the ceiling all at once. Enormous. Impossible. 8 limbs, or more, hard to count. They extended into the walls, into the floor, into the ceiling, like the roots of a tree. The body was covered in chitin, ancient, cracked, millennia old. That very liquid oozed from the cracks, slightly sweet, metallic, the blood of the dungeon, the blood of the captive. Eyes. Many. Jay couldn't count them. They opened and closed, slowly, like a creature waking from a 1,000-year slumber. Each eye the size of a human head. Each one was staring. At Jay. Only at Jay. His field journal opened on its own. The pages flashed by. Other people's entries appeared one after another. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Different handwritings, different languages, different eras. Every time traveler who had come before him, every spider, every soul the dungeon had captured and fed to whatever lay before him. Their entries, their observations, their last words. And among them, the final entry of that second one, the one who answered, the one who wrote, "A captive is not an enemy. The entry was complete, not cut short. He had finished it, right now. From the depths of the creature before him, because that second one was here, inside, part of the captive, part of the dungeon, devoured, digested, but not destroyed. His consciousness lived on within him, just like hundreds of others, thousands, all the strays, all the fodder, all souls. They didn't die. They became part of the captive. They fed him, sustained him, and tormented him. Because the captive didn't want to eat. The captive wanted to speak. 1,000 years ago, the world caught him, the first stray, a creature with a mind too alien. They locked him in the dungeon, buried him. They forced it to grow downward, and the dungeon became both his prison and his body. It grew around him, from him. The floors were his bones, the corridors his veins, the monsters his cells. And the wave was his scream. Every 500 years, the accumulated pain and loneliness burst forth. An army of mutants rose to the surface, not to kill, to be heard. But up above, they heard only a roar and saw only fangs, and they responded with swords and fire. And the prisoner fell silent for the next 500 years. Jay stood before him. Small, by the standards of the creature that was the dungeon, he was a speck of dust. But a speck of dust that looked with 8 eyes and said, I. He raised his front paw, a human hand, and touched the prisoner's chitin. Warm, alive, pulsating. And he tapped, short, long. The way is clear. The creature froze. All its eyes opened, every single one. Dozens of eyes, each the size of a human head, stared at the little Spider-Man standing before it, tapping on its shell the way one knocks on a door. A response came from deep within the creature. Not a vibration, not a sound. A thought. Direct, clear, bitter. A single thought. A single word in a language that didn't exist, but which Jay understood with his whole body. Lonely. 1,000 years. Lonely. Jay sat down in front of it, cross-legged, like a human. He opened his field journal, the real one, his own. With the first page, where a grape hangs on a string, with Mr. Krustik, with the colony, with Hannah's portrait, with the RNA taxon, with all the sketches, all the diagrams, all the affectionate nicknames. And he began to show it to him, page by page. The creature watched. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone wasn't running away, wasn't fighting, wasn't screaming. Someone sat down in front of him and showed him the drawings. Behind him stood people. Hannah, Maylin, Yuna, Leah, Arine, Sorcha, Cassian. 40 adventurers, 600 spiders, 24 monsters. Everyone was silent. Everyone was watching. As a little spider, who had once been an entomologist from Portland, showed his field journal to the 1,000-year-old dungeon captive. Like a presentation, like a lecture, like on a blog. 8 eyes, 1 heart. Let me tell you what I saw. He spoke for a long time, hours, page after page. The creature listened, and somewhere between the food chain diagram of the 200th floor and the portrait of a mycophagus beetle, subspecies A, it did something it hadn't done in 1,000 years. It laughed. Not with a sound, with a vibration. The walls of the chamber trembled, the ceiling vibrated, the floor hummed. The entire dungeon, from the 200th floor down to the 1st, for a second. And on the surface, in the kingdoms of Aelantir, people looked up and listened. The earth hummed. But not like before the wave, not like before a catastrophe. As if someone far below had laughed, for the first time in 1,000 years. Jay closed his journal. He looked at the creature. It was looking at him, with all its eyes. There was something in them he hadn't seen before. Not pain, not anger, not hunger. Interest. Alive, warm, curious. Like a scientist facing a new specimen. Like a child facing a new toy. Like a lonely creature facing its first friend. Jay raised his hand, 4 fingers. He touched the chitin. It was warm. And he spoke aloud in a language the creature didn't know but understood. Hello, I'm Jay. I'm an entomologist. I used to be human. Then I became a spider. Then I became a little bit human again. I paint with watercolors. I have a blog. 8 eyes, 1 heart. And I think I understand what it was like for you here. The creature closed its eyes, all of them, slowly, and opened them, like a blink, like a nod, like yes, like I hear you. The wave didn't come that year, nor did it come the next. The captive didn't scream. The captive had someone to talk to. Jay was building. Not a nest, not a trap, not a fortress. A bridge between the top and the bottom, between people and the underground, between the surface and the core. Silk threads stretched from the 200th floor to the first. Signal threads, communication threads. Every vibration was transmitted up and down. The underground ceased to be a meat grinder. Slowly, with difficulty, with resistance, with 1,000 problems and conflicts. But it had stopped. It was becoming what it was meant to be, a living part of the world, recognized, understood, not scorched, healable. On the last page of his diary, Jay drew himself, standing on the edge of the abyss, hood thrown back, 8 eyes, 4 arms, a cloak made of 6 types of silk. Next to him, 6 figures. Hannah, Mei-Lin, Yuna, Leah, Arine, Sorsha. Behind them, Cassian. Behind him, the camp. Behind the camp, the dungeon. Behind the dungeon, the world. Below them, a creature, large, ancient, with its eyes open. He signed it. Jacob Hahn's Field Journal, Volume 1. Zerat Door. Levels 1,200. 312 species described. 47 species tamed. People saved. He paused to think. Crossed it out. Wrote it again. People encountered. Didn't cross it out. Left it as is. Put a period. Closed the journal. Placed his paw on the warm chitin of the wall. The dungeon pulsed, slowly, calmly. 1 beat every 12 seconds. Like a whale. Like the world. Like home. His home.